pushed the button by accident. So you're right.
Is everybody, who isn't here? Terry, I see Alana is here, John is here.
There's still a few people wondering, but you're.
Wow.
We can start. It's late. We gotta start. Okay, guys. So if you're over here by the table, we're about to get started because we're behind.
And you just let me know. Just let me know when we're ready to go.
Are we ready?
So we have the camera. Okay. Live.
We're ready.
All right, welcome back, everybody. All right, so for my next block, we're going to talk about ABLE. Okay. So ABLE was initially created by Georgetown University in 2016. It was known then as EPIC, and it was taught to the New Orleans Police Department under that name. Since then, they've done some research. They've updated the curriculum quite a bit. It now goes by the name of ABLE, which is Active Bystandership for Law Enforcement, for the law enforcement profession. And what it is at the basis is a peer intervention program. So does anybody know the most popular peer intervention program that exists? Peer intervention. Peer intervention.
CPR.
CPR? That's a good question. Good one. Okay, what about? No? How about, has anybody heard Don't Let Friends Drive Drunk?
Oh, yeah.
Don't let friends drive drunk. Why do you think that is successful?
It's your friend.
Because it puts the onus on who? On the other person, right? On the other person. You are not going to let your friends drive drunk. Okay? It's not on the person. So when they started that campaign, it was don't drink and drive. Just don't drink and drive. And then they updated it and said, don't let your friends drive drunk. They put the onus on the friends. Okay? So that is essentially what ABLE is. What ABLE is and does is a bystandership program where we teach law enforcement officers how to notice, decide, and act when they see things that may become a potential problem. Okay? So what it is not a discipline program. It is not a duty to intervene, which we can talk about. This is a early notification system where you're going to be with maybe a partner, maybe it's somebody you work with at the district, and you notice something. Maybe it's just that they are normally very squared away individual. Shoes are polished, uniform is pressed, and slowly but surely they're coming to work disheveled, they're unprepared, they're not acting the way they normally do. That's going to be our notice portion. And then there's the decide, where you're going to speak with the officer. And remember, this is just friend to friend. Okay? You're going to try to figure out what's going on in that individual's life. And then you're going to act. And the act could be many things. It could be talking to a supervisor. It could be referring that person to our employee assistance unit, maybe our police psychologist, who's Dr. Franklin. And so we have notice, decide, and act. Okay? We have three pillars of ABLE, and that is peer intervention, officer health and wellness, and preventing misconduct. Those are our three pillars of ABLE. And this concept is used in the general public and in many other professions around the world. They actually developed this same type of program for pilots. So when pilots are operating their plane, the only person that is with them that can correct them is who? It's the co-pilot, right? So we can give our officers tools to look at individuals, look at people that they're working for, and help them, help their wellness, prevent misconduct, and those types of things, okay? Okay, same thing with the operating room. With the operating room with a surgeon. So why is it active as opposed to passive? Why do you think they call it active? Go ahead.
Because maybe there's like something that's like urgent,
Mhm.
and if you don't like intervene, then maybe something bad will happen. So
Sure.
you can't be passive in a situation like that. You kind of have to be active.
Before you hit your button, are most people active or passive?
I think passive.
I think passive too. And this is talking about active, what we can actively actually do to help somebody way before our duty to intervene. And I think I talked about duty to intervene before, where that officer is obligated, not only ethically and morally, but legally, to stop some type of inappropriate use of force. This is way before that occurs. Okay? This is to stop the situation where maybe somebody doesn't even know yet that there's an issue, and you just speaking with them can trigger something in their head. Maybe they're going through something at home, maybe a divorce, maybe a sick child, something to that effect. All right, so let's talk about a couple of things that we teach our officers to do. And this is, oddly enough, no different than our de-escalation portion we talked about earlier. We teach our officers a tactical breathing technique called the 4x4 box breathing, okay? And it is probably exactly what you think it is. It's 4 seconds in, hold for 4 seconds, 4 seconds out. It's to help relieve the stress of the situation and allow the officer a moment of clarity and opportunity as they are, if they are going through maybe some type of situation that is escalating. So when we train this, it's a 1 8-hour day. So you have to go to these types of ABLE training. So it's 24 hours. I did it. It was online. And when we train the division, it's 1 8-hour day that all members of the division go through, and then 2 hours every year in in-service training. They get, I don't want to call it remedial, but reinforcement training. And everybody goes through that, including recruits in the academy. So recruits will still get that 8 hours. To be an ABLE agency, there's 16,000, I believe, 16,000 officers that are ABLE trained. And I believe, don't quote me on this, I have it written down somewhere, 300 plus agencies that are ABLE certified. To be ABLE certified, you have to follow the tenets of ABLE. And you have to the division has to make commitments to ABLE to carry out these practices. One is community support. So every ABLE instructor has to get at least 2 letters from members of the community recommending them to become an ABLE certified instructor. The other is meaningful training, which ABLE, the division does not design any of this training. It's given to us by ABLE, so they design, research, do all the hard curriculum work, and then we give it to our instructors to teach. Dedicated program coordinator. So I was the ABLE coordinator when we first rolled out the training. It has since moved on to, I believe, Sergeant Harper in the training section, but that is ABLE's point of contact, one person who coordinates the entire program. Accountability. So not only do we train this, but we've requested it to be put into policy as an actual ABLE policy, so that, let's say you're going to get your discipline block coming up, but there are aggravating and mitigating factors when it comes to discipline. Maybe you broke a rule, but there's a mitigating factor of you were trying to de-escalate your partner because your partner was doing something inappropriate. Okay, you're still going, this is not an excuse for you, you're still going to get in trouble for whatever infraction that you may have occurred, but it could be a mitigating factor that you are using techniques of ABLE to try to calm the situation down. This hasn't been put into official policy yet, but we have discussed putting into our official disciplinary guidance. Officer wellness, the agency has to develop an officer wellness program. Excuse me, we have what's called SMART objectives. And in those SMART objectives, one of them is officer wellness. So, excuse me. So officers are expected to participate in some type of wellness program. We don't have a specific one, like, hey, you have to follow this workout regimen. But officers are permitted to work out on their lunch. Each district has a gym. There's a gym at Public Safety Central and one at the Justice Center that they can utilize. And there has to be follow through for the department. So this is, again, this cannot be a passive thing. This, as an able agency, we're expected to have signage up, reinforcement in all of our training. And we're working on ways to do that with our mobile CADs now, where we're trying to get able signage inside of our mobile CAD so that the officers are seeing it every day and remembering that they have attended this training. Just kind of reinforces it throughout the course of their day. Okay, we talked about empowerment. Okay, 324 participating agencies. And I think that might be it. So I will open the floor for questions.
Okay, you mentioned wellness. Does that include mental?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it does. So we are lucky in the division. We have our employee assistance unit, and they can do a myriad of things. One of the things is mental health awareness. So let's say I'm with you and we're partners, and I've just noticed lately you have been increasingly snippy with members of the community. You're just short with them. You're not really saying what, nothing that broke a rule, but certainly things that we could do better, right? So I can either formally or anonymously contact EAU, and they're going to contact you. And they're just going to start with a conversation. Hey, is there something going on? Is there something that we can help you with? And then they will work with you. They'll follow up with you to get you whatever help that it is that you need. Now, sometimes the issue is not something that's going on with your life. Sometimes you just have a bad attitude, and that has to be adjusted too. So we might have to go to a supervisor and say, this individual is just being repeatedly unprofessional. Well, that's going to have to be addressed because that's an infraction in itself. Okay. Did that kind of answer your question? Okay.
So I guess we can go to you have a question? Okay. Benito?
Thank you. I was wondering but the officer assistance unit that existed before ABLE, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So I was wondering if there was an increase in like contact or like after implementing ABLE, if there was an increase in like the referrals to the employee assistance unit, and then also if you could just talk about if you saw any like changes in how if that came from the program.
Okay, so unfortunately, the first question I don't have because the employee assistance unit, they don't provide us any statistical information. That's all kind of housed there. It's for officers. They want to feel comfortable to go to them without any information. So unfortunately, I don't have that. The second part of it is yes, I have noticed a difference. It's one of those things that it's hard to quantify, right? It's like an officer's presence in a community. Are you preventing crime just from being there? It's hard to put that on paper. But what we have noticed is empowering our officers with, hey, you need just calm down for a second. And understanding that this person knows that I'm trying to help, and I know if he does it, that he's trying to help or she's trying to help. Okay?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have questions?
Yes, sir.
What was the second point? You had peer intervention. The third one was
Prevent misconducts,
got that one.
peer intervention, officer wellness.
You guys must be doing a pretty good job because I don't think there's been too many officer suicides lately that I'm aware of.
I'm trying to think of the last one we unfortunately had. It has been a couple years. It's been a couple years. I have to say that as far as employee assistance and those types of things, the division is very proactive in helping and getting resources and that type of thing. But what we don't want officers to do is rely on EAU for everything. We don't want somebody to see something and just call EAU and let them worry about it. We want officers to take a proactive approach as well and to get people help that they need so that a very bad incident doesn't occur. Okay?
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Kenny?
This is more, I just wanted to reiterate something you mentioned earlier, but if you're in the dark place, I feel like some people when they go there, they think that like no one notices.
Sure.
But when someone close to you notices, like I think that completely changes your perspective on where you're at. So I think it's really powerful and effective to have the peer group, to have the person spending time with you be that person who's the mirror, right, for how you're doing in your behavior. So I think that's really great.
And I'll add to that as well. And Commissioner Chura could probably back me up. You spend more time with your partner than you do with your family. A lot more time. A lot more time. You are this close to another human being for 10 hours a day, 40 hours a week. This close. You know when he hasn't had sleep, or you know when he has something or she has something going on at home. Okay?
Yes, I just want, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
Sarah Ridgeway.
Just to, because you instigated a question, how are partners found between police officers? Do they try to complement both people's skills?
There's some of that, certainly. A lot of things are taken into account. The amount of time an officer has, right? In all things being equal, you don't want two very new partners to work together if you can avoid it. Sometimes, unfortunately, it's unavoidable. But if I have 6 months on the road and she has 3 months, we might want to split them up and put them with veteran officers just so they get a better idea of if nothing else, the streets, just learning where to go and what to do, that type of thing. And then there's some of relationships, right? So, hey, do you want to work on day shift card together? There's some of that goes into it as well.
Sarah Ridgeway.
Okay, so a quick question. The statement that it protects those who do intervene reminds me a little bit about the Good Samaritan law.
Mm-hmm.
How often have there been instances where officers who did intervene, to help, ended up being rejected or feeling that retaliated? That's the word I'm looking for, retaliation, right?
That's a great question. So part of the ABRE program is to have it would really be a retaliation policy, which we have, about the standards of not retaliating against someone in that fashion. To your first question, I haven't seen anything of such substance where I could teach off of it yet. I did see something in another city where there was 3 officers there, an individual laying down and someone on top of them, and I believe it was a supervisor who grabbed them and threw them off. So that's when, I'm sure there are things, but when I have to teach something, I have to be able to dice it up, and I haven't seen anything in our division that's specific. Okay.
Commissioner Reed.
I'm sorry, I have one more. We were talking about the friends on that
Sure.
drive trunk, right? And we're talking about partnership of 2 officers. You have 2 officers with the same mindset. They may have a bias against a certain group of people, right? So I don't even know how you would figure that out.
Okay.
Maybe the number of complaints they received from.
So there's a lot of, it's a great question. There's a lot of checks and balances in that regard. Okay. So number one being other officers on the shift. Okay. Other officers on the shift will know what is going on their shift. Okay. That's number one. Number 2, supervision. Okay. Supervisor has to know what's going on. They are responsible for every person in their zone or in their sector. It's a sector supervisor. Okay. So that's number 2. We have OPS, which we can report to anonymously. Okay. And there's even a function where we can report to OPS through our employee assistance unit. Okay. So you can even go to employee assistance and say, I want to anonymously report this person for misconduct. Okay, so we have our OPS, we have our internal affairs, and we have our inspections. Okay, and now we have you all too now. Okay, so there's absolutely zero there. It can never be an excuse that the officer did not know who to go to. Right? We talked before about quarterly inspections. That's an aspect too. So our sergeants have to do quarterly inspections, our lieutenants have to do quarterly inspections, and our captains have to do quarterly inspections. And they're all different. So even if you're just randomly going through your day, you know that a supervisor will probably be watching your video at some point. Okay?
Inspections of the
Body cams, yes. Yep.
Commissioner Adams.
Thank you. I guess my question is just about, so once maybe like someone's reported, sort of like, I think you kind of answered it. Do they just go through the normal disciplinary structure, or is there some type of assessment of like maybe like a trauma assessment or like a mental health assessment? So like, I mean, there's clearly a disciplinary structure in place, but you know, things are, especially when you're dealing with people, police do go through a lot of trauma. They're overworked right now.
That's a great question.
So,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
So I just want to know, you know, we want to hold people accountable, but we also want to see people as full human beings.
Sure.
And so, you know, what other supports do they have? Because, you know, there's a lot, you know, it's complicated.
Yeah, so we have Dr. Franklin, who's our police psychologist, is going to be the one that does a mental health assessment. Okay, so if you are, we have it's structured out in our policy, but let's say you're involved in a very significant incident. Okay, maybe you have a infant child at home, and you know you go to a place where an infant child's unfortunately died for whatever reason. Okay, the supervisor more than likely is going to contact EAU, who is with Dr. Franklin. I say EAU, but really I mean EAU and her because they work side by side. And then she's going to be able to do talk to you and do her own individual assessment to make sure that you're prepared to go back to work. If Dr. Franklin says you can't come back, then you can't come back. It's not like I've never seen a situation where the doctor says you can't come back and the chief for some reason would override it. I have not seen that. She's kind of the hierarchy. It's her. Okay. And if she says you're not ready, you're not ready. Okay, we have more specificity in our policy as far as using deadly force or even significant incident of non-deadly force. You know, maybe it's just a physical interaction that we have, but maybe it's escalated very, very high. And we have like, 3 days automatic administrative duty for these reasons, 3 days of restricted duty. You understand what I'm saying? So there's a few automatics like, hey, this happened and you're gonna be on admin for a bit. And then there's more broad where somebody approaches Dr. Franklin and says, there's an issue here. And I'd like you to talk to this person. And then the ball's in her court.
So follow up, please.
Sure.
So in a scenario, let's say an officer, is involved in a scenario you talked about, like a dead infant, they have an infant at home, it's just kind of just triggering in addition to whatever else they've been experiencing as an officer. So the doctor says that they're not allowed, they take their time, they come back. Is there something in place where do they get a reevaluation in 2 weeks? Do they get a reevaluation after a month?
Sure.
Like, I just feel like, when you go through trauma, there's like a process, and then like at a certain point, you will maybe be able to function.
Sure.
At a certain point, but then it's like still there.
Sure.
So I just want to know, like, is there like a follow up something in place where the doctor's allowed them to come back, but are they going to get monitored or checked in on afterwards? And if so, like how frequently and for how long?
Sure. And my least favorite response is that's not a question I can answer for you, unfortunately. Only if I had to guess, I would say there's certainly follow-ups. If I had to guess, I would be shocked, to be honest with you, if there were not. What those look like and what they are, more than likely, there are probably a lot of phone conversations, And Dr. Franklin has an office downtown, and she's very flexible. She'll meet with you wherever you want to go. If you want to go get coffee at a coffee house, she'll meet you at the coffee house. She's very flexible in that regard. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
I just kind of wanted to add something to that conversation about trauma. And I think, because trauma is so individual and every person has a different reaction to trauma. And even, a lot of times when we think about trauma as a thing that happened, right? Like some disturbing thing that happened. But actually what trauma is somebody, because of that thing that happened, which can be like one major event, or it can be a pile up of a bunch of smaller things, is whether that thing has overwhelmed your ability to cope. So you can have two officers who experience the same maybe disturbing call, right? Or distressing event or distressing period, right? And one of them, it might impact their functioning, and another one, it might not, because they maybe have a different history of trauma. Maybe they have different resources in their lives right now. And so I think that with the exception of a few, it sounds like kind of concrete policies of if this happened, you at least get this so that everybody can kind of like take a look at it.
Mm-hmm.
For some people, trauma response might happen right away. For some people, it might happen 6 months later, a year later. Sometimes somebody might not go into a trauma response. And so I think that is probably why it's not as prescriptive.
Mm-hmm.
Because you are, and I think that's also one of the things that what makes ABLE so important is that for everybody too, their response to trauma, how that is going to impact them and what it's going to look like is going to be really different. For some people, it might make them really irritable. For some people, it might just make them more withdrawn. For some people, maybe they start drinking, more. And so, it just is, there's so many different things. And, the people who are going to see that the best are really going to be somebody's partner. And so just
the way I always think about it is everybody has a cup. Everybody has a cup. Some people's cup fill up faster than others, but everybody has a cup. And I just had a fleeting thought. I want to address something. Sorry. I wanted to go into my cup thing, but all right. I'm sorry. Go ahead. It'll come back to me.
The cup of what? I just did a little bit of research on ABLE, and it's based on the research of Irvin Staub,
Okay.
Who worked a lot in genocide conditions.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like there could be ABLE is not just for law, like the core tenets of ABLE of how people psychologically respond to violence and perpetuate more violence could also be used in other circumstances.
Absolutely.
Has there been maybe any possibility that a different type of ABLE training could be given to members of the community? If there could, it would just be nice for there to be a common kind of set of training and understanding between the police and community. And it has been used apparently with just civilians too.
Sure.
In a different form.
Yeah, I'll look into that. I'm not sure if they have a civilian one, a specific training for civilians. But I can definitely look into it and get back to you on it. I actually took a class with him. He was very, very, very knowledgeable on the topic. So, did you have something, sir?
Do you still have the violent loss response teams?
No.
The what?
They used to go out for civilians. If you were a victim of trauma or if a loved one was killed, they would go out and speak with you about how to cope with it.
Yeah, no, no, we don't. I'm not sure when that program ended. But I know there's a lot of programs. I'm certainly not doing them justice. That not only the division but law enforcement in general have. There's also one. I can't remember the name of it, but it is a peer-to-peer intervention with retired law enforcement officers. Six. Yes, that's it. Yeah, it's 6, and it's retired law enforcement officers that volunteer their time specifically to talk with officers that have gone through trauma. Unfortunately, sometimes. I don't know how we got into this, but unfortunately, sometimes a law enforcement officer is more comfortable talking to another law enforcement officer, and that program kind of helps, right? But anything else?
Thank you. So I think it's best to start to transition into the next session to try to ensure that we stay on schedule, which is bias-free policing. Will you be presenting this?
Yes, I will be Lieutenant Sean Smith
Okay.
for the day, so I gotta switch my brain over. Just give me a sec to grab my notes. Alrighty. Everyone ready to go? All right. So I'm going to talk about our bias-free policing, our general police order, our training. In 2018, I'm not familiar. I'm sure there was. I'm just not familiar with what we did before 2018 as far as this specific topic. But in 2018, we rolled out a new bias-free policing policy. And in our policy, we discuss bias-based policing, what it is, bias-free policing. We talk about implicit biases. We talk about a myriad of issues in bias-free. So when we rolled that out, we provided the division a block of instruction that obviously discussed the policy and really focus on implicit and explicit biases. Okay, so kind of the best way to understand it is an implicit bias is they consider it system one thinking. It could be automatic. It could be based on your past experiences, things that you've watched on TV. There's all kinds of reasons an individual may have an implicit bias. An explicit bias is different in the fact that an individual would actually act on that explicit bias. Okay, so one of the things that we really reinforce in training is individuals have implicit biases, and we can give you some tips and techniques, but it's never okay to act on an explicit bias. Okay, so some of the things that might trigger an implicit bias. Okay, this kind of circles back to ABLE, believe it or not. So an implicit bias, you're more likely to have an implicit bias when you're tired, when you are angry, when you are hungry. And we can give officers techniques like the tactical breathing, like understanding, treating individuals equally. We can kind of give them ideas on, hey, you have this system one thinking. The system two thinking, where that comes into place, is taking an extra second and making a conscious decision on what you're going to be doing next. Okay? So system one is quick. More or less, it's automatic. You can't really control it. And then that system two is taking an extra second, taking a breath, and kind of understanding why you have that thought and what you're going to do with that thought. So to teach bias-free policing, there's a difference between bias-free policing and cultural competency. Okay, cultural competency is and we've done this in the past with our district training awareness. It's taking individuals that might be living in a district, a community, and getting a better understanding of their norms, their social norms in their community. Okay, that's not really what we're training in bias-free policing. Really, what we're looking at bias-free policing is procedural justice. Okay, procedural justice. And there are 4 pillars to procedural justice. The first one is neutrality, which is training our officers to make decisions fairly and equitably. Okay. The second one is voice, is giving members a voice in the interaction that is going on, which we've discussed before, right? I think we've touched on that in every block I've taught so far. Giving an individual a voice in the interaction, hearing and listening. The third pillar is respect. Treating people equally with respect and dignity. And then the last pillar is trustworthiness. Ensuring that detentions are no longer in duration than is lawfully necessary. Building a community bank account. Okay. We teach a community bank account. So every positive interaction a person has with a police officer puts money, not real money, puts deposit in our community bank account. okay? And every negative interaction is a withdrawal from our community bank account, okay? So we have our deposits and our withdrawals, and we've developed that idea and that concept to build in each avenue of our training, okay? So just like we talked about our integrated reality training before, we built bias-free assessment and matrix into every training that we give to members of the division. So this is not a one-off. This is not a lecture, a long lecture where somebody stands up and says the same stuff over and over. This is what the expectations are of our police officers when they're interacting with members of the community. Okay. Now, there's a lot of reporting requirements when there's an allegation of bias-based policing misconduct. Okay. Lieutenant Depende is going to handle a lot of that in his discipline block, but I'll touch on it a little bit. So if an individual, there's many avenues that an individual has to make a complaint of misconduct against a police officer. This would include a biased-based policing, it's after lunch, report, okay? Okay, so if there's an allegation of bias-based policing, the officer is required without any type of other interaction or argument to provide an OPS complaint form to that individual. They can fill it out and give it back to them, or they can fill it out and go to the district, or on top of that, the officer is also required to notify a supervisor, okay? So generally what will occur is if somebody is making an allegation against me about a bias-based incident, my partner will handle all of that other information, okay? Because we don't want anything to escalate, or we don't want any issues or concerns. So my partner is going to give the OPS complaint form, a supervisor is going to respond to the scene, and then the complaint is going to be taken, it's going to be faxed to OPS, and it's going to be sent through the chain of command, okay? Now, one thing about sector supervisors sometimes what will happen is they will be tied up, meaning they cannot respond. Maybe there is a SWAT situation going on. Maybe there is a significant incident like a homicide or something on the freeway where there might only be one supervisor in that sector and they cannot respond. In cases like that, we would not expect the individual to remain on scene to wait for that supervisor. So what we say is we provide the phone number, or we try to get their phone number, and we provide it to the supervisor. The supervisor is expected to try to contact that individual prior to reporting off duty for the day. Okay? Individuals can make reports of bias-based misconduct at any police station. I'm sure here at some point, if not already, to our, they can go into OPS, which is right across from the Justice Center. They can make a complaint there. And each complaint is given a tracking number and investigated by our Office of Professional Standards. Now, if they see something that is, maybe it's not a citizen complaint, maybe this is an actual infraction of our general police orders, they will work with our internal affairs so that the officer might get a specification, like let's say the officer didn't turn his body cam on where they were supposed to, right? So our internal affairs will handle the specification of that incident, and then OPS will handle the specification for a citizen complaint if it becomes founded that had occurred. And excuse me, that is all I have for that. I will be happy to answer any questions that you have. Yes?
Do we have any questions? So I guess we start this side. Commissioner Benito, and then we'll work on it.
Thank you. As part of my job, I'm the Director of Diversity and Inclusion at a large behavioral health center. And, I do a lot of implicit bias training. And in the field and in a lot of the research, there's a lot of disagreement about whether it works.
The implicit bias training?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like whether you can really train, like whether training is really effective in reducing implicit bias. Yeah. And I feel mixed about it. And I feel like I see mixed results also. And so I just wanted to get, I mean, obviously, I think it's worth doing,
Sure.
period. Like, but, and you know, what a lot of the research shows is that if that's the only thing you're doing, it's definitely not going to work, you know, and that it is strengthened when it's part of other initiatives that are happening and is really embedded in everything that the, you know, agency or division is doing. But I just wanted to see if you feel like through the implicit bias training or bias-free policing training that you've done, have you seen differences in how people are interacting?
So it's a two-part question. The first part is I did not know before the discussion of implicit and explicit bias with the division. I'd never even heard those terms. Yeah. So I think it's beneficial to our members that they know and understand that, and that they understand too that there's things that you can actually do to counter some of those biases, right? The second part of your question was okay. So that it's a little bit hard to quantify on the bias-based policing level, but what I will say, the biggest difference that I have seen is the procedural justice. In the procedural justice, we are really officers are really taking an extra second to giving people a voice in the interaction, even if it's going to potentially end negatively with receiving a citation or possibly an arrest or something to that effect. Even giving somebody a voice and allowing somebody to be heard it goes a long way. A lot of times I'll allow people to talk and they can vent and whatever, and then we have a discussion. It's like, I understand, but you're going to be receiving a citation. A lot of times what I have found is just giving somebody a voice in that interaction, allowing them to vent, and they then understand at least somebody is cared to stand there and listen to me, right? And even if something ends negatively, hey, I had my say, I voiced my concerns, it ended in a citation. That's not necessarily the end of it, and that's what we tell people. That's what we tell members of the community. Even if you don't agree with your citation, this is not the end. We can go to court, and I'll be there, and we can discuss it, and then the judge will make the ultimate determination. Okay, ma'am.
I actually found the bias-free policing that the city of Cleveland uses, like your training that you guys use. And so I just have a few questions around. I think we oftentimes have seen bias-based policing in dealing with interactions with youth in particular.
Okay.
But when you go through, even you guys train, it is really, there's parts of it that's really good in that it addresses like racial profiling and the history and like slave patrols and everything, gender, but there really isn't that much mentioning around youth. But even with, we talk to community, and oftentimes when we're framing conversations, even around violence and around crime in the city of Cleveland, it always pivots back to youth. And we have a lot of programs and a lot of organizations that will do conversations with youth and police. And youth oftentimes say, by and large, that when they are interacting with police, they feel judged, that they feel they're taking on a parental role. We've heard officers, like I've been to events where officers even mention, like, well, I just feel like kids shouldn't be out at 7 p.m. roaming the streets. And so I do approach them more firmer because in this community, I think this is what these kids need. All those are examples of like bias-based policing, but none of that stuff is addressed in the training. There's nothing around youth or anything of that nature, but so much of our crime, even when you like look at the news and everything, or justifications from our police, it's like the kids are doing car thefts, the kids are doing this, the kids. Where does youth fall in bias-free policing, and has that even been a conversation that CPD has had?
Certainly, we certainly have had it, and it's addressed in our interactions with youth policy. We have a specific policy just based on that effect. But bias-based policing, when interacting with youth, is addressed as well, but it certainly isn't on that level of youth are more frequently under these types of circumstances. Youth are burglarizing business, you know what I mean? So I think the biased free policing that we have would fall under youth generally. I can't speak to the officer that said, children shouldn't be out at 7 o'clock. And I think the interactions with youth speaks to it significantly better in how to talk to youth, when to approach, how to approach, and that type of thing, as opposed to this. The bias-free policing is more about understanding the implicit versus explicit bias, okay? And regardless of its youth or if it's gender, race-based, or whatever, understanding that an individual might have that in ways that you can counter it. And regardless of that, explicit bias is never okay.
I guess just a follow, because I think we were for like an article that was done recently around CPD
Okay.
and interactions with youth, and it highlighted like multiple incidents of negative interactions with law enforcement, CPD, and police officers.
Okay.
Some of them were like, even I think one of them was like a parent or an aunt like call out the police on like their nephew, and like the way the police like approach that situation, and the child was like ADHD and like pulling them. Like those are from everything from how, when you read it, from how the officer entered the scene. There's a lot of instances where you can tell that it is some type of implicit bias that's going on. And so because I've read the interactions with police policy, I think it's good, but there's nothing that is getting to that root cause of the implicit bias.
Okay, I understand what you're saying, but I still feel like this covers that, even though it's not specifically saying youth. It's never okay if you have an individual with a mental health in a mental health crisis to overly approach them or put your hands on them without any other. So it's not just youth, I guess. I think you want more specificity in youth, and it's not a bad idea, but I think this covers that as well. Okay.
I have a few questions because I have some background in this. I guess I'll begin by maybe providing some background. You might know it, but maybe some of the other audience members may not. So the implicit bias research began at a university, and there is a test for it called the implicit association test.
So I don't mean to cut you off, but that's Harvard's implicit association test, and all of our officers have taken it.
Okay, so what I want to ask with the IAT, I guess I want to give people like maybe a break here. You said, how do you get rid of implicit bias? Well, it's just something that I don't think that's necessarily the purpose. The purpose is what Lieutenant Ryan has said, that something that's system 1 thinking does not have to result in system 2 thinking. Your bias does not have to lead to certain behavior. And you see actually people that could have, because one of the things that the IAT shows that is very interesting is that most Black Americans have bias against other Black Americans. And it came in Malcolm Gladwell's book. He took it multiple times. He tried to get rid of, and it just not, there could be some variability. There's obviously flaws to the IAT, but that was a surprising thing because a lot of these biases are culturally manifested. And you could have it's not just about race. You can have a test of Swedes versus Norwegians, and they can show bias. Like the IAT can be, it's just about how, I mean, what I'm asking is there a scientific neurological explanation given to these officers to make it less moralism, right? It's not like we're trying to say here, you're a bad person because you have implicit bias. It's just how the brain works. It makes shortcuts. It develops certain types of thinking. So let me go back. So the IAT, did they take different types of IAT? Because there's ones for Black and white Americans, Asian. They took all of them.
Not all of them, but they're when I teach procedural justice in the academy, they take 2. So they could be any 2 that they want, that they like. There's all kinds. There's gender. There's all kinds. And it's important to remember about the implicit association test. It's not showing bias. It's showing associations. So I don't want to get those 2 things too far combined. It's just if nobody knows what it is, you can take it on your phone and you get a picture, and it's how fast you're clicking the picture. It's just associating different things. It's not necessarily. It's not. Yeah, I couldn't give her a test and say, well, you definitely have a bias in X thing, because that might not be.
Well, it's also, even if it's implicit, you may not show the behavior. It depends on, I have friends that are white Americans that are positive to Black Americans, very rare, and neutral is very rare, but they don't do anything. They just don't do anything.
Yeah, that would be explicit bias, Right.
Well, no,
If
it's not explicit bias, meaning that it doesn't necessarily result in an action. You could have someone that has implicit an IAT that shows against Black Americans that still might advocate for Black Americans at in
Sure.
active, right? I'm not pointing at you.
But that is the difference between the two.
But I just would like to, so are they taking the test and are they given, do they keep the results private to themselves?
We discuss them
You
in
discuss
class.
them.
Mhm.
But so they're only taking 2 of the tests though?
That's only because that's only for time purposes, because usually I have 40 people.
Okay.
So I have everyone take them, we discuss the results, and then I have them take them. The only rule is they can't take the same one.
Okay, and when you said ways to counter this IAT or whatever implicit,
Mhm.
can you tell us what they are?
Sure.
What do you teach them?
Sure. So we teach first off, we have to teach, not have to, we teach awareness, right? Many people have implicit biases, and it's important that you may have them and you may not even know, okay? So awareness is gonna be our first step. And then our second step is going to be our slowing of the situation down, our taking a breath, our not acting on that system 2 thinking, taking a beat, analyzing the situation, and then making a determination, not based on your system 1. And then our third way is reporting, okay? So reporting of the partner, like, you did some type of bias-based policing and I'm gonna report that, or reporting on a civilian complaint that contacts OPS or fills out an OPS form.
Okay, so I want to see if there's any further comments or, well, there's some people that haven't spoke, so I'm gonna go.
Okay, I just want to make another comment directly to the new recently created police committees. Again, this bias-free policing is part of the consent decree for Cleveland, and so I think we need to listen very carefully to this.
Yeah.
We need to be able to assess whether what's in place will help move us toward meeting that consent decree mandate. And if not, those policy committees, those training committees need to be on top of this and be ready to make recommendations for changes.
Thank you. Sure. Okay, so then we have Commissioner Adams.
Just a few things. But first is a comment. I just want to say the comment about Black bias against other Black people. There's a lot of research done on this, but you got to remember that Black people grow up in the same society that everybody else grows up in. And so we're seeing the same images of each other that everyone else is seeing. So I don't want that to be something that we sort of, it's just dangerous to really isolate that, because it's, we live in a society where there are particular image over centuries that have been perpetuated about Black people, and we see those images, and oftentimes I see it as a teacher all the time. Like, I work in a school where we have a lot of high level students that have done really well, and then what I oftentimes see is I see students that have been good students, and then they're in a school where we're pushing academics and we don't tend to have less problems. And then some kids feel like they need to be the bad Black kid, right? Like, they feel like, that's a normal type of thing. So I just wanted to be conscious of statements like that, because I think that there's like a deeper, longer, more complex history there. And so we wouldn't want to oversimplify that. So I want to say that. But my other question, and this is more for, as Chair Ridgway talked about, in terms of, like, I'm just thinking about the committees that I'm on, and I'm receiving sort of like how the CDP is getting trained on some of these things. So I'm thinking about sort of like how we continue to work with the TRC, the training committee, to sort of address these things. So I just wanted to just ask about the kind of like the depth of the bias-free policing. I know that, as Commissioner Benito said, there is some sort of disagreement or a conversation happening about, is it effective or not, and if it's worth actually doing. So personally, I think that no one actually really thinks that they're biased, right? So that's like something that you have to start with, that people don't actually believe they're biased. But I also wanted to know, it seems like the training is more generalized right now. And so to get into what Commissioner Garrett Ferguson was mentioning, like, for example, I was wondering, when you're training, do you delve into sort of like example, like the example of youth?
Sure.
Do you like train officers with sort of like examples of like how we could stereotype youth, and because we're just thinking that they're just youth, and then we just treat them a particular type of way, and then like if we give them the examples of like how these internal biases may perpetuate themselves, and then give them the examples, but then like do you also talk about how that bias may actually manifest itself in like a real life, real time scenario? Because again, people are not thinking that they are biased, but it may, I'm just a little concerned if it's like not dealing into some of the specifics about like how patriarchal biases will then inform, like if a woman is like, like if a woman is like really sort of like upset about something, but there's a history of like dismissing women's concerns when they're heightened as like hysterical, right? So I just think that like, I just want to know, is it just general? Or
so a lot of the training is based off the policy, right? Because we're going to train to policy first, right? The higher level of those types of questions, have we got into that high level? The answer to that is no. Okay. We talk about the things such as the implicit bias. We talk about stereotypes. We talk about how to combat them, when they may manifest, those types of things. But the higher level, the answer is no.
Just a quick follow-up. Well, so for example, so what's not happening? Say for example, so what's not happening is if you have like someone from the LGBT community, are we giving like a list, examples of like if this happens and you say this or you respond in this way?
Yeah.
Are we doing that?
So we have,
or are we speaking in general?
So a little bit of both. So we have our more finer details in our district training awareness, where we have worked with members of the community to discuss communities in their area and give the officers a more broad understanding of that community as a whole. Okay. Like I believe that the 3rd district has a Nepalese community. So we've worked with them. We've talked about what are some things that officers need to know about members of your community, that type of thing. I want to address something you said, and I'm sorry, I just can't remember what it was. I'm sorry.
So we're gonna have.
That's what it was, real fast. So cultural competency. Cultural competency. So remember, I began this, and I said this is not cultural competency. Should there be some cultural competency? I think there should, and there is some in our district training awareness, right? But to understand a culture or a community better and get a better understanding, I think is that high level information that you're referring to.
So we're gonna have Garrett Ferguson, and then we're gonna have Lou, and then we're gonna try to move it on because we're out of time.
I forgot my actual.
Go ahead, Commissioner Ferguson.
More so just a comment, just in thinking about, as Commissioner Rodriguez always remind us of like our future work with our chairs and our different committees, and thinking about just like outreach and how we're right now taking the training, we ask questions, but how sometimes when we say things, we want to be mindful of like everyone doesn't have certain context. I think it's just important for all of us to understand that, especially when we're talking of sensitive subjects around race, and intra-race, and making statements that regard to certain interracial relations between a certain ethnic group, that without providing additional historical context, people viewing can sometimes maybe put certain stereotypes or certain their own biases about us as a commission. So we just want to be mindful that we're in this, we're Googling stuff, we're looking it up like in real time. And so we are making these statements just off the cuff, but also understanding that once this is replayed, we want to be mindful of when we're making statements, especially about interracial relationships. without adding that historical context of like white supremacy and things like that, it really can be misconstrued. And I think even just going back to bias-free policing, that is something that I've noticed that I actually like that CPD has done is that they ground their bias-free policing in acknowledging historical consequences and historical evidence and things that have actually happened in history. And so when we then are making certain statements, we can't just make those about certain racial groups without also acknowledging that, because we too are modeling the behavior that we want CPD to follow and other community members.
So and trust me, I love you. I love you, my sister.
Okay. So go ahead. One thing that we have not done post-COVID is in, I believe, 2019, we brought in a member of a community. The name of the class was Refugee Awareness. He was a refugee from, I don't remember the country. I believe it was from either Africa or Middle Eastern country, but that came over to the United States, and we brought him in, and he, this person talked with every single officer on the division during in-service training. We haven't done that post-COVID, but one of the things that we have really explored hard, it's hard because of our training schedule, but that's not an excuse. One thing we've really wanted to do is have a member of the community come in and talk to our officers, explain these types of things, explain how to better interact with members of their community.
Just last comment, I was a part of a project at OPTA, the Ohio Peace Officer Training Academy.
Yeah.
So one of the guys, I don't think is no longer working there, but back in 2020, I believe, he actually pulled together select people from the Cleveland area and other parts of the state, and they actually talked about cultural competency and interviewed us, and we had an opportunity to help develop this training with the Ohio Peace Officers Training Academy that can be utilized around that. I can even reach out to see if he still has some of the stuff, because he interviewed us, he took video. Many members of the Cleveland community were able to participate in that, and that was something great that the state did. So and it's similar to what you were talking about when you were brought in. So I don't know if like there's a way to like how you guys connect with the Ohio Peace Officer Training Academy, but it was great that we got to do that. Maybe if they had
we wouldn't have to. We could do our own.
Okay.
Right? I mean, we could do our own very specific thing. There's just limitations, unfortunately. The first limitation is I don't really want to do a video because I like the interaction. Right. The second limitation is our training schedule. Usually our blocks of instruction are about 4 months long. And you'd be committing to 2 to 4 hours, 3 or 4 days a week. That's just hard for somebody to come volunteer that sort of time. And one of the things, and not only settlement agreement related, but just training related in general, you want to make sure everyone gets the same training. So I don't want an individual to come in for 2 classes and then a class here and a class there, because then people are getting different information. So these are just things to think about just generally when we're designing training.
So we'll have Commissioner Wong and then Lou, and then we have to move on for our time to ensure that we're respectful of the trainer's time as well as we enjoy our Sunday, Saturday. Commissioner Wong.
Thank you so much. So I just wanted to tag on to what Commissioner Garrett Ferguson said there. So there's no kind of explicit, training for youth, and I guess the aged would be included in that. So what I was struck by is that a lot of the protected class categories, right, that by civil rights, may not be included in this bias-free policing policy. And one that's never really talked about as a different class was literally class. And what was interesting in one of the GPOs, it says that the police officer is not able to use high crime as a neighborhood as a initial measure of
solely a measure, correct?
Solely a measure of reasonable suspicion. So I guess my question is twofold. With the historical aspect that's taught in that class, is it only about Black and white relations? Are there other ethnic groups that are part of American history? Is that taught? That history is taught?
Yeah, not on the level like the gentleman spoke about earlier, to that high level. Not on that level.
Is it even mentioned, like what has happened in the Chinese Exclusion Act?
No, it is not.
It's not. Okay. Just to note that Asians and Hispanics are the 2 increasing populations in Native Americans. Are they mentioned in the training?
No.
No. Okay. So with this, are we able to enhance, is this like a set training that
No.
you have from, so we are able to enhance it, especially with, you
Yeah.
have a
So every
historian
year,
on the,
every year we do bias-free training. What that looks like is up to us. So it could be a lecture, it could be integrated into a scenario where we have a debrief at the end where we discuss why things occurred the way they did in the scenario. It could be an e-learning exercise. It could be all kinds of different things.
okay, thank you.
We got Lou. Lou wants, she'll be the final comment. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good afternoon again. My question actually follows Commissioner Wang's main point. And also, you have been telling us training schedule sometimes is hard to arrange, and you all actually want to make sure all the officers can get equal training so they have the same opportunity, just like everybody else in the force. They will know whatever they should know. However, lots of things it's very impossible to squeeze in the short time to get everybody up to date for the 21st century. So before the care response, the full version of care response come into reality, lots of things police officers are not trained still exist as a current problems. So I would like to mention something more than just the mental health issues. In our community, it doesn't matter what kind of race or age. We have a lot of people actually having developmental disabilities. We have people with just basic physical disabilities. So the cultural competency in this case is kind of important. For example, you may have some females, yes, when they talk, they were just being very animated, but that doesn't mean they want to be violent. At the same time, a deaf person or half-deaf person may express him or herself that way as well. That doesn't mean they want to pose a threat to other people around, police officers included. So for all these kind of situations, of course, we don't really want to burden police officer to get extra stress on it. But let me repeat again, before full version of care response can come up to share the loads, officers, please forgive us. Community members are real people. We should not be always profiled, stereotyped, or limited to how we should behave or what we should comply. Because at the same time, you also said that lots of laws change rapidly. If you guys cannot really catch up with that, please do not ask all the community members to catch up with all the laws. So we have to have this mutual understanding in order to start a harmony in the community, especially between you as the helper to serve and protect the community members. That's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So the next portion of our training, so we will conclude with that.
Okay.
Thank you so much for
Is this
all
my last one?
the information that you provide. Well, yes, all the
I'll be here to the end.
information that you provided. We felt that it was very helpful, and thank you for stepping in.
I said we're going to get to know each other very well by the end of the day.
The next portion is disciplinary guidance by Lieutenant Deepanidi.
Do we want to skip the second break?
Um,
This break?
I don't, yeah, we're running behind. I think we should continue to progress through our training. If anyone has to use the bathroom, please feel free. But due to time, I think we should continue to move. And for this portion, because of our time, I'm gonna ask that we withhold questions until he does his presentation.
The last Saturday.
No, I was really cool. I'm sorry. And I didn't mean to. I know this is short, but I know that's all we do.
All right, there we go. Old school, going forward, enter those. Oh, okay, cool, very much.
Well, we're just trying to get this up, so maybe I'll.
Thank you so much. Please feel free to start your presentation. It's being live streamed.
Do I need
So-
this microphone or? You can-
Probably, yeah.
Okay.
So we can please have your attention. I know that it's a long day.
All right. I'm Lieutenant Chuck DePente, Charles DePente. I'm in the case preparation unit. I've been on Cleveland Police Officer for 30 years. Right now I work out of the chief's office and I'm part of the disciplinary process. The allegations of misconduct come to my office. We then put them together into a finalized charge letter, which specifically states what the officers did wrong. And that's to set up a due process hearing that'll be either before the chief or the safety director. Some of these can come from OPS, the Office of Professional Standards. They can come from internal affairs. They can come from their own supervisors. I'd say the majority of them actually come from their own supervisors when they observe some sort of misconduct. So I have a PowerPoint here. It's a little bit dry, but it goes through a lot of the policy, and I don't want to summarize policy. Maybe there'd be some miscommunication there. This is going to lay it all out exactly as it is, so there won't be any miscommunication there, and then I'll be happy to, of course, answer any questions or clarify anything that there is. Okay? All right. I guess I just hit this now. Okay, so we're covering what misconduct is, the types, who we get it from. Okay, any improper conduct other than minor infractions, which we'll cover in a later slide, as defined by our general police order, including alleged violations of division policy, procedure, regulations, order, federal, state law, or other standards of conduct required of division members, including the improper use of force. Okay, so this is an overview of what misconduct is. We have two basic types. We have internal complaints of misconduct. That's going to come from internal affairs, district supervisors, maybe inspection unit. And then we have public complaints of misconduct, and that's going to come from the Office of Professional Standards. So we're going to begin with internal complaints of misconduct. We actually have two separate general police orders covering each type. The first one is this general police order, and it's going to cover internal complaints of misconduct and how we deal with those. Okay. It is the policy of the division to ensure that all allegations of member misconduct observed or that a member becomes aware of are reported to a supervisor, internal affairs, or anonymously to internal affairs or the employee assistance unit. All allegations of misconduct should be considered fully, fairly, and efficiently investigated. This is the policy of the Division of Police. As a reference, prior to many years ago, I actually used to write these. Policy is like the driving force. This is what the division wants. And then we have procedures that make the policy happen. So this is what the division is striving for. 4 different kinds, and then we're going to cover each one. So administrative misconduct, an allegation of misconduct, which if true would be a violation of a rule, regulation, or procedure. There's clearly no criminality involved in this. So this is something that a supervisor sees an officer do something that was violating some sort of procedure. It's nothing criminal, but it's just something administrative that they've done wrong. Maybe they filled out a form incorrectly. There's something wrong with their WCS, it didn't turn on right away, or the pursuit violation, they didn't call out all the information they needed to for the pursuit, things like that. Criminal misconduct, much more serious. An allegation of misconduct, which if true would be a violation of one of our ordinances, the Ohio Revised Code, or a federal criminal statute. And we know where these are going to go. Here's some examples, and those will go to internal affairs, of course. Okay, and then serious misconduct, an allegation of misconduct involving a breach of civil rights, biased policing, which you guys, I heard just went over that quite a bit, or discrimination against protected class, dishonesty, brutality, corruption, objectively unreasonable, unnecessary, and disproportionate use of force, or similar serious allegations. So now we're into the very, very serious offenses. And we'll go to the opposite end of the spectrum, minor infractions. Alleged violations of division policy, procedure, regulations, orders, or other standards of conduct require division members that are immediately correctable through minimal intervention by a supervisor with the goal of non-repetitive behavior. So minimal intervention includes redirection and or non-disciplinary counseling to correct the behavior. We have some minor violations listed here. So that's sort of, it's almost like coaching in a way, you know. However, these coachings are noted and canonized, and they come to my office, as a matter of fact, and we track them. So they'll check with us if somebody has committed the same minor infraction like a third time in a year. Okay, obviously they're not getting it. So then they can no longer have this sort of low level of interdiction to correct their behavior. At that point, then it's going to go through the chain of command for more corrective action, than probably in the form of discipline. Okay. All complaints of member misconduct shall be taken and considered regardless of the source, and all members who observe or become aware of any acts of misconduct by another member shall, okay, down here, immediately verbally report the incident to a supervisor of internal affairs, and shall follow up with a Form 1 report of the incident directly to the supervisor of internal affairs. For the record, if we have different levels of violations from, we were to like minor violations, we have with Group 1, Group 2, and Group 3. I don't know if you're familiar with those yet, or you guys been? Yeah. It's okay. So failing to report a Group 2 violation is a Group 2 violation. Okay, so failing to report Group 1 is a Group 1. So if you see somebody do something incorrect, and you don't report it, you're basically guilty of the same level as they are. Okay, and if the supervisor suspected involvement in the misconduct, obviously, screen, I'm sorry, repeat on you a little here, but I don't want, okay. Form 1 report shall be made to the next supervisor in chain of command or the internal affairs unit. So we got to go up a little bit higher if the supervisor is involved. Okay. When any act of misconduct is reported to a supervisor, the supervisor shall immediately document and report the incident via division tracking our software, which is Blue Team, which you guys are familiar with. Blue Team? Yes, no? So we have an internal software program. The two of them piggyback together. One's called Blue Team, and that's what's done at the districts. And then when it gets to my office, it gets converted to something called IA Pro. But everything's tracked. Nothing can be lost. Nothing can disappear. Once it's in, and it has to be dealt with. So can't get lost, it can't just disappear. So that's the nice thing about it. Okay. Via the division tracking software for the entry to the internal affairs superintendent for review and assignment in accordance with internal affairs procedures, and let the platoon commander know. Platoon commander would be like over the shift at a district or something. Okay, what if I don't report? Failure is what I covered already. Okay, failure to report an act of misconduct is an egregious offense. It will subject the member to disciplinary process, and if sustained, it will subject the member to discipline up to and including termination. So if you saw something that could be for termination and you didn't report it, you're up for termination. So, yeah. So you can report things anonymously to internal affairs. How they would track that back, I mean, then let's say you were hit up with this, and then you say, well, at this time I left a recording. This is what I said. They would, they'd somehow have to be able to backtrack and verify that you did do it. But right, that's a good question. Okay. So complaints of misconduct routed by the internal affairs superintendent to the neighborhood district commanders via our software for investigation will be completed by the assigned supervisor of a higher rank than the offending member, obviously, and it's got to be somebody who did not participate in that incident. So internal affairs got it. They looked at it and said, there's no criminality involved in this. They did a check, and then they send it back to the district, and then the district continues on with their investigation, and it goes up through the chain of command to the chief. Okay, supervisors have 30 days to complete their investigation and forward it. And any extensions, you have to get an email, and you're going to attach it to the blue team showing for some reason you had to maybe extend it, for whatever reason, maybe somebody's on military leave or something like that. Okay. So these are some of the things that are going to be included. Their narrative of the incident. They have to make sure all the evidence that they've gathered is in there. So if there's video, there's pictures, names of everybody who witnessed it, and they're going to have their information in there, their evaluation of it. And if corrective action is warranted, they'll detail everything by specification. I'm going to hand out some specifications for you real quick.
Pass around, I guess. Thank you very much, sir.
One. I keep one for myself.
Yes.
Okay.
I know.
Okay. Let's see,
I don't.
So the specifications are very important. This is what my office should receive. And they have to basically state exactly what the officer did wrong. So the officer has some understanding of what they did wrong, so that the person hearing the hearing officer knows exactly what was wrong. And so, and these two specifications kind of give an example of how one would be written. You make it very clear on what had happened, who it was, what they did wrong. So like in our situation for the first specification, as soon as you get an assignment, you have to immediately turn on your wearable camera system. So as you're driving there, it should already be on. That's because if you arrive, if everything's going crazy, you're not gonna have a chance to put it on then. Okay, so put it on before, so we have to put it on right away. Let's say you thought you put it on, you didn't put it on, whatever. Then we review the video. Hey, you didn't turn your camera on until you were on scene for 1 minute. That'd be a violation, and this is sort of how you'd write it up. Okay? And then the second one is I would consider a much more serious one, and that's where you use your taser on a person who's passively resisting. This would be clearly a violation of our orders, and this would be probably something that would be going to the director. Okay, the first one would go to the chief, because that would be like a group 1 offense, a lesser offense. This last one looks very much like something that would go to the director as a group 3 offense, the highest level of offense. Okay? And we want to, one of the things interesting, most officers don't do that, be helpful if they put the date of the general police order they violate, because their general police orders are getting updated all the time. We want to make sure we're looking at the proper one for whatever the policy was at the time of the offense. That's what, that's what counts. Okay. So going back to those minor infractions, little things you do that involve coaching, you're going to give a form. I don't have the attachment here for it, but it's a pre-structured form basically saying what they did wrong, laying it out very clearly. The officer signs it. It's all dated, so we know exactly what date the offense occurred, what date they were coached, and that comes to us and we track all of that to make sure that in case it happens 3 times a year. You can't just willy-nilly give out verbal counselings. It has to be approved by the chief. So you can't take something and say, well, I'm just going to give this guy verbal counseling for this. It's going to go up the chain of command. If the chief says, no, this is more serious than that, we're going to have a hearing for this, then we're having a hearing. So verbal counseling is not approved until it gets all the way through. If the chief does approve it, then we put in our tracking, and I have my detective send an email to the officer saying that the verbal counseling was approved. Because they have no idea, actually, it was approved until we tell them, because it's not approved until the chief says so. And once again, like the chief, anyone even up the whole chain of command could look at this and say, no, this warrants something more serious than just the coaching. And if they're civilian, they have their own situation with contracts and things, so they'll go to internal affairs. And once again, it's going through our division through blue team. So you're looking at some sort of misconduct, and then all of a sudden you realize, wow, looking at this guy's, maybe we're looking at video of something, and then we see it looks like something is a crime. So immediately, obviously, you have to report that to internal affairs, and failure to do so will get you in trouble for the same thing as whatever you're seeing happening. Okay. The chief of police reserves the right to pursue disciplinary action for a violation of rules, regulations, policy, or procedures, and depends on the recommendations up through that chain of command. So like I said, the whole chain of command can say verbal counseling is okay. I think that's appropriate. The chief looks at it and says, nope, we're having a hearing. We're having a hearing. Okay. If you're retained, now this would be off duty. If you're detained as a subject of a criminal investigation, so I was at a bar, there was a fight there, I got detained for a while they figured things out, and I was subsequently let go. But if I was detained at all, or they were like looking at me as like I might be part of this, I have to report that. So I have to immediately notify my supervisor or the next on duty supervisor in their chain of command, and look through radio. And then before the end of my shift, I have to submit a Form 1 describing the incident. So we're tracking sort of everything. If they don't tell us, we find out, which we have a good chance of doing, because if an officer's involved in something in another city, they do something in Parma, there's a half decent chance the Parma chief is going to call our chief and let them know. Okay. The supervisor shall then document the information and forward it to the internal affairs through Blue Team, and then they'll look at it. Okay, same thing goes for protection orders, restraining orders. If your driver's license is expired, you have to notify us too. That's all by rule. If we find out about it some other way, you're going to be in trouble for not telling us. Okay, so in addition to the problem of having this, you'll be in trouble for not telling us. Okay, and once again, everything's going through internal affairs. Internal affairs sort of has their fingers on everything. They look at everything, they decide what they're going to keep. The rest of the stuff they send back to the districts if it looks like it's just administrative. Okay. Okay. What is this here now? Continuing on. Members of the Cleveland Division Police have a continuing obligation to serve the community in a responsible, professional, and accountable manner. An integral aspect of this obligation is to ensure that division policies and procedures are complied with in a reasonable and effective manner. To meet this obligation, the division will provide readily accessible process through which all members of the public, as well as members of the division, have confidence that complaints against a member will be promptly and objectively investigated and resolved. So it's just saying we're going to be fair about everything. We're going to try to do it quickly, not with undue delay. Continuing on with these public, so these are the ones we're getting from OPS. These investigations not only provide for corrective action when appropriate, but also protect against unwarranted criticism when policies and actions administered correctly and are in compliance with proper procedures. So we did something wrong. Somebody in the public thinks we did everything right, but they think that we violated sort of policy. But this is to protect us against that. Furthermore, a timely and thorough investigation serves to protect the members of the public from police misconduct and members from complaints that are retaliatory, manipulative, or result of a misunderstanding of our procedures. They're there to protect everybody. We're going to cover all these topics. So everything's got to be documented, and we're supposed to accept them without challenge. Somebody wants to make a complaint, just give them the complaint form, system, however they need to in completing the complaint. The officers have to have them in their car and ready to hand out. When asked, members shall provide their name and badge number. A couple officers just got in trouble for this. OPS went through video. Everything was unfounded except that they saw the officers didn't give their name and badge number when asked. So they got gigged for that. Members shall discourage, interfere with, or obstruct any person making a complaint. And obviously there'll be no retaliation against individuals filed complaint. Okay. All complaints, regardless of their perceived severity, shall be accepted, investigated, and documented by either the division or the Office of Professional Standards. Complaints shall be accepted in a professional and courteous manner, without question or challenge, providing members of the public a full and fair opportunity to file complaints complaints alleging member misconduct. All division members shall have available for distribution upon request by members of the public an OPS complaint form and translations. We have a GPO covering the translations for that. Okay. we cover all that in a second here. Yeah, sure, go back. One or two slides.
Just the last one.
Did I go back? Oh, this last one, I'm sorry.
It was the one where you talked about the translation.
Okay, yeah. There we go.
I was curious for the deaf, do they have a video of that?
So I haven't worked on the streets in a little bit, but we do. Yes, we do have a method of I think they have iPads
Yeah.
that are accessible.
I'm just curious because it said available translations
Mm-hmm.
for communicating with the, like. Yeah.
So we have in our Bureau of Communications, we have some bilingual specialists. Obviously, we have almost somebody all times like for Hispanic, but we also have almost every language you could run into. We have a database of how we can get a hold of somebody if needed to communicate with that person.
Oh, I think I understand. It just, deaf is in the policy name.
Okay. Oh, okay. Yes.
I
Yes.
was
Yes.
like, do you have like an ASL version? Like in the, yeah, never mind.
Well, I do. Yeah, I think we have an iPad, and then the person can sign with them. Yeah.
Sign language?
I would call it a language.
Yeah, so do we have somebody who are proficient?
They have
With
interpreters
sign-
that they use.
It's on the iPad.
Yeah.
It's on iPad only.
For sign language.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh.
No, didn't. Okay, let's see. Okay, this will be covering here. Okay, so who can make the complaint? Well, it could obviously be the subject of a police incident. It could be somebody who just observed the police acting on a person. It could be a parent or something like that. It could be an outside agency, like another police department could want to report on an officer. And then it could be someone we don't even know who it is. It could remain anonymous. And how they can do it right there with the officer. Say, I want to make a complaint right now. The officer should just give them a form. They can go online and do it. There's these city websites. They can go to any headquarters building, anywhere basically there's police officers. They can complete a form, and it's City Hall, and of course the Office of Professional Standards where it'll eventually go. They don't have to complete the form, so they can get about halfway done. Say they don't want to do anymore, but still submit it. You still forward it to OPS, and it can be accepted without a signature. It can be done over the phone, which is clearly not going to have a signature. Okay, so we got a complaint, and fortunately for the member, he is not the subject of the complaint. So any member of the division becomes aware or is informed that an individual wishes to make a complaint against a member shall without question or challenge offer them the complaint form. They'll give them the form, advise them to complete it on scene or take it home. If they're taking it home to complete, then they can take it to any place we mentioned earlier, any police station, OPS, City Hall. They're going to get an incident number from radio. So they're going to tell radio, hey, I gave out a complaint to somebody, and they're going to get an incident number to put on there. This is all being tracked. Okay. And if completed on scene or when the form is returned, they'll provide the pink copy to the individual's receipt of the completion, and they'll log it in that it was issued. Okay. They'll forward, as the members will forward to their immediate supervisors, then they shall email them to OPS before the end of their tour of duty, and we keep the yellow copy. Okay, now this is not so good. Now I'm on scene and they want to make a complaint against me. So I'm going to sort of like remove myself from the situation because as best I can. So I immediately notify my supervisor who will respond to the scene and assist the individual filing the complaint. I explain to the person, okay, a supervisor is coming to assist you. And this is sort of important. So we can't now try to almost like punish the person. Let's say it was a traffic stop or something like that. The supervisor says, man, I'm not going to be able to get there for like a half an hour. Then we can't make this person stay and wait. So, no, you got to stay now until the supervisor comes. They want to leave, then they can go file the complaint any of the ways previously mentioned. However, we're to remain at the location until the supervisor arrives unless he or she is unable to respond to the scene, which would be very rare, but it is possible we could have a major crime occur, like a homicide or something like that, and they might be tied up. Okay, if the individual does not want to wait for the supervisor to arrive and the supervisor is unable to respond, then we'll explain the options to them of all the different ways they can file the report. And if the supervisor is subject to complaint, we have to get a higher level supervisor to respond. Supervisors have to respond to the scene unless it's like absolutely they cannot make it. We're almost done. All right. If they left the scene for the arrival, it says make attempts. Notice that's plural. So I just can't call one time. You gotta make attempts to contact them and get a hold of them, find out what's going on, and so they can interact with them to let them make sure that they can make their complaint. If there's a belief that in learning this information that internal complaint of misconduct will be generated, then they have to take care of that according to our policies. And then, so we'll get summoned to the Office of Professional Standards if we do something wrong, or not necessarily we did something wrong, but let's say there's an allegation we did something wrong. We'll rephrase that. So by order of the chief, members who witness or participate in an incident that is a subject of an OPS complaint shall fully cooperate with the OPS investigation, including responding to written questions submitted by OPS or appearing in person for interviews when requested by OPS. And the scheduling will be facilitated through the member's commander in a timely manner and shall be in accordance with our provisions. Okay, so now we've gone through all that horribleness. But I really didn't want to paraphrase that because, like I said, it's a lot of it's policy. It's exactly I'm not going to shut anything else down. I'm just going to close this now. This computer. So you guys are, I guess, are already sort of familiar with the violations. Have you guys seen like this list of like, okay, you guys have this and you guys have the penalty classes? Okay. All right. So I guess you guys don't need. If you guys want them, I have them here. It's front and back. On the front, it goes through. Okay.
Yes.
So why don't we just pass them out so everybody can get one just to make sure. Should have kept one for myself again. No, I forget it. I mean, I don't very well, but yes, three is the most serious. One is the least serious. Some things appear in all three categories. So like AWOL. AWOL is a group 1, could be group 2, could be group 3. The way we're kind of looking at it is if you're missing from work for less than an hour, you're supposed to report to work at 7. You got there at 7:20, that's a group 1 violation. If it's more than an hour, we're going to make that a group 2 violation. If you miss the whole day, that's going to be, you're gone, you never reported to work, that's a group 3 violation. So, without notifying, you're just, and if there's rationale for it, you can explain that at the hearing or submit some paperwork, which might then quell it. But so that's how you can have things in multiple categories. And then that's the one side, and then the flip side has the corrective action that can be taken under each situation. So once again, we get our cases like in case prep where we get the stuff we get it from internal affairs, inspections, the district or bureau, which is our most common one, or the Office of Professional Standards. It goes through Blue Team. So I just want to make sure I cover everything in this. If it wasn't in the presentation in the PowerPoint, that I cover everything that's in the outline here. So. Okay, yeah, this disciplinary matrix is intended to create, as it says here, a culture of transparency. So everyone can have a pretty good idea what I do wrong, where it's going to fall. Now, what we really use, this piggybacks off of the general police order, which has definitions. There's a definition of a group 1 penalty, a definition of group 2. So this is supposed to work off of that. So oftentimes the chief will get something and it'll be like, well, this really, as I look through the definitions, this really fits more with a group 2 violation than a group 3 violation. It fits with that better. And so he might say, I'm gonna make this into I'm gonna deal with this as a group 2 violation because in looking at the definition, it fits into this definition more appropriately. So we have there's disciplinary action to be taken and non-disciplinary. Our non-disciplinary action, That would be that verbal counseling form that's like the coaching that could be done by just their supervisor, line supervisor. If it gets to the chief's office, basically the equivalent of that would be the chief's letter of reinstruction. He looks, okay, you haven't done this particular, it's a minor violation, you haven't done it before. As a matter of fact, in the letter that the officer will get, we'll say this, you haven't had a traffic accident in the last 2 years, or, you know, since you haven't recently had one and you just had this accident, we're just going to be making a letter of reinstruction. But let's say if you did have an accident the last few years, now you had another one, you're not going to get a letter of reinstruction anymore. Now it's going to get kicked up a little bit, probably a written reprimand, and it'll keep going up from there if you don't learn how to drive. So we can also offer retraining. There's reinstruction and retraining. I'm trying to incorporate these definitions a little better. Reinstruction is done at the district level. So that would be, have a supervisor go over this general police order with you. Make sure you understand the policy and what you're supposed to be doing. Retraining is a little more serious. That's going to send you to the academy. Maybe you need to work on your tactics of how you approach a car or something like that. That's something that we're going to let the academy do. So we have reinstruction and retraining. That's also does not consider discipline. And we're not going to accept non-disciplinary corrective action when discipline should have been done. So in the levels of discipline, it can start with suspensions. And then, well, the first lowest level is a written reprimand. That's officially discipline. It's really letting you know you messed up. We're not gonna suspend you yet, but what you did was incorrect, and it's higher than just I want to reinstruct you. And then after that, there's suspensions. If you have rank, you can be demoted, and finally, the highest, of course, is demotion. I mean, it's termination. And demotion can only occur, you know, in the group 3 level. Okay. So we're gonna have, so we get the letter, so just go through the process, or we get the allegation what the officer did wrong. We're gonna type up this charge letter. It's gonna have these specifications in there exactly like you received, say exactly what they did wrong, set a date where they're gonna have a hearing before either the safety director or the chief or one of their designees. It could be an assistant director of under the safety director or a deputy chief of under the chief. They're gonna have a hearing, and then they'll look over wearable camera and all that other stuff and render a recommendation to the chief. The chief will also look at some video and discuss and determine what is the appropriate penalty. Same thing happens with the director, although I'm not involved in things that happen with the director. That's separate. I am sort of part of like the round table that happens with the chief. And so I can maybe give a little clarification maybe on the matrix and things like that to the chief. So there are some contractual issues in here. Union representation. Obviously, everything has to be done with due process. I've got all the due process rules right above my desk to make sure I never violate anybody's due process. It's very important. And then there's certain contractual obligations. So like OPS, the chief can't issue discipline. Let's say if something happened and then an OPS complaint was received 9 months after the incident. By contract, if it's submitted over 6 months past it, the chief can't issue discipline. He can still, however, have the hearing, say what he believes the corrective action should have been. So let's say he did something wrong, it didn't get reported in time, the chief would say, had I the ability to, I would have suspended you, but I'm contractually barred from doing that. And so all I can do is give you this letter of instruction saying, don't do this again. But he can still hear the case and state what his feelings would be. Yes, sir.
Just a quick question, follow up that. So that applies to if a civilian makes a complaint against an officer.
Correct.
Right. So if like, say for example, what happens if like an officer failed to report something in 9 months? Does that still apply for that? Like what would happen in that scenario?
Right. I have to look at the contract. I know that's in that's written, I believe it's specific to public complaints of misconduct, but I have to look closely at the contract, exactly how it reads. Once again, though, if the officer failed to do it, actually what would happen, and let's say that was barred, that officer could still be charged though, because we would just find out about then that he didn't report the offense, and then he would be in trouble for the same level of violation. As far as I know, we have 1 year for patrol officers and 6 months for supervisors from when the division becomes aware of a charge to put out, aware of a violation to put out the letter, put out a charge letter. So I think we'd be covered by that. I think it's specific for OPS for those complaints, but I'd have to look very closely at the contract. We don't have that. We rarely have that issue with OPS. It does happen every now and then. I don't really know of it happening with division things because, you know, as far as I know, we report it. But I guess if we don't know what we don't know. So, yes, ma'am.
Sorry, I'm a little confused. Okay, so let's say an issue, complaint is filed to OPS. And then, because what we know is that there is a backlog. And so a lot of times, I mean, some of these cases are taking, I mean, at least 6 months to then before they go, and often more.
I think it's the more the backlog is in CPRB.
Okay.
Yeah, in the review board.
Okay, but then let's use the CPRB example. If it goes to the CPRB, a lot of times it is.
I think I have your answer.
Okay, great.
So
Thank you.
the thing is when the division becomes aware of it. So we're not made aware of it until the CPRB tells us. So the clock doesn't start ticking until we become aware. Then there's that 6 month or 1 year timeline comes in. Is that sort of?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, so I'm assuming though that the division would become aware when OPS investigators are asking questions.
No. So as a matter of fact, I work in something IA Pro. This is the second set from Blue Team. It then goes into IA Pro. I am actually barred from viewing anything at OPS. It's like an OPS investigation. I can't open it up. I can't look at it. We don't have access. The division doesn't have access to their investigations until they release it to us.
So is it like formally aware? Because I mean, if someone's interviewing people to ask about an incident, wouldn't you become aware?
Yes,
that they're
formally. Okay, I think that's a good way of putting it. It's formally aware. Is the date was used and it hasn't been arbitrated or fought in any way, shape, or form, or grieved in any way, shape, or form. Is the date that we receive the investigative packet. That's when we actually find out what exactly the final allegation is.
Right, but then also because people can submit complaints in multiple ways, does that then create a problem if someone submits a complaint after an incident to the supervisor at the same time that they submit a complaint to these other channels?
Right. So, okay, there are sometimes investigations that happen simultaneously. This does happen. I don't think it's because they reported to two different entities, but we definitely have had it where they report something to OPS, but at the same time, a clean police supervisor saw the same infraction. And so they both followed through. And we remember, we just had one of these, and what we ended up doing is, because so nothing get lost, and like I said, once it's in Blue Team, it's there, it can never go away. So we had the hearing for everything, because we were a little bit quicker than OPS. Actually, the timeline ran out on the division's investigation because OPS took much longer. And they have different things. They go through the CPRB, and then it's got to come to us. But it didn't matter because the specs were almost identical. So when it came to the hearing, the chief said, "I'm dismissing these. They're out of time and dismissing, but I'm finding you guilty of these OPS ones." And it's like they each had one group 1 and one group 2. It was like it was very similar. So it worked out sort of to be the same, but we couldn't hold 2 hearings to be like double jeopardy kind of hearing and those situations are very, very rare, but they have occurred. But that's that. But it wouldn't be, I don't think, from reporting to us and them. Now, if OPS gets something that they consider criminal, they're supposed to then immediately notify internal affairs, and then they'll take that route.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. And the last thing is just the grievance procedure. So how that works. So like I say, grievances are free. So we discipline somebody. It costs the union a sheet of paper basically to say, no, we think this discipline was too much, and then they could file it. If the chief did it, it would go to the safety director to review. If the safety director did it, then it goes to City Hall. These are outside of my purview, sort of, because they're I don't deal with those. I do deal with some grievances, but they wouldn't be for discipline. Mine, the ones that I investigate and deal with, would be, let's say it was big during COVID. Officers were off on sick. They were trying to come back. The medical unit was so backed up that they couldn't return people in time. They're like, I was forced to be off duty and I should have been able to come back. So I dealt with those. Like, I investigated those. Because other ones with discipline happen at a higher level than me. If ultimately the city and the union are at an impasse, then the union does have the opportunity, of course, then to arbitrate it, which then now does start costing money. And then, arbitration decisions, we go with whatever they say, and we make all the adjustments in all of our paperwork. But,
Yeah, I think we can open up for questions.
oh yeah.
First portion, we got Chair Ridgway.
Okay, so the question I have, I've been sitting in on the police review board, and so a decision had been made there regarding a certain discipline.
Mm-hmm.
It went up, it was rejected or went down from what was sent, downgraded, that's the word I'm looking for. Does the police review board at that point have a chance to appeal the decision that?
Yeah, so OPS, they take their complaint to the review board.
Right.
The review board looks it over and they make a determination.
Right.
They send it back to OPS, who then gives the division what's called a findings letter. We use that, and we very closely mimic as best as we can the wording they have in the findings letter for the specification. We write up those specifications. OPS comes, the investigators come to the hearing. They present their side. Of course, the union is there for due process. After that's completed, then usually before a deputy chief, they will review probably camera stuff or any documents were presented, and then and sometimes we go over stuff together, talk about things, look at policy, look at GPOs, what exactly GPO is supposed to mean, and then we have a conference with the chief, and then the chief's going to do one of two things. He'll either agree with their, and then he can immediately impose whatever the discipline level that the CPRB recommended, because they do also recommend 1, 2, or 3. Or he can do what's called a departure. And there's sort of like two sort of different kinds of departures. One can be, I agree with what you said the officer was wrong, but I think it more closely, this is what I sort of mentioned maybe a little bit earlier, I think it more closely fits with the definition of what a group 1 violation is than a group 2 violation, and therefore I'm going to, I recommend, he can't do the discipline because it's not in his purview once CPRB has it. So then he will say, and I recommend this be, or I find this is more closely comports with a group 1 violation, and I recommend a 2-day suspension, maybe as opposed to something that would be in a group 2 violation, which would be 6 days to 10 days. That will then go back to CPRB at their on the second Tuesday of the next time they have their meeting. They will discuss that, and then they will either decide if they agree, because the chief's going to put in it, and I'm actually the one who writes these.
I've seen some of yours then.
So we're going to try to explain as best as he can. I have these meetings with him. I try to explain as best as I can his rationale for why he wants it to be, wherever he's falling, and I try to do the best job I can to put his thought process in there. And he of course reviews it, but he's a very busy man, as we know. And I try to put the rationale behind why he's saying what he says. And then the CPRB meets, and then they either decide to, oh, yeah, okay, we understand now where the chief's coming from, or they say, no. Yeah, and right. And so as it stands right now, those are being sent to the director. They're being appealed, and then the safety director hears it. Although my understanding, we were just talking about this earlier, the CPRB in the new charter amendment will have the ability, from what I understand of reading it, to just say whatever penalty, like to agree with the chief or not agree with the chief, and that would be the end of the line. Okay?
Say that again. Say that last. Either agree or not agree.
Right, so the chief says, I'm departing, I think there should be a 2-day. CBRB says, nope, we think that, no, we've read your rationale. We believe that this still really belongs as a group 2 violation and then tell the chief to impose discipline. Now, I'm not a lawyer, so, we haven't done this part yet. So, pardon? He's nodding no, so
What? No. I'm saying we'll pull it up if we need to, but it's my understanding CPRB has its own ability to overturn the chief and the safety director
Right.
now.
And that's
I'm not an attorney, but it's in there. They're
Right,
not.
we haven't done it yet, so that's why I don't wanna
They
say
have
what
yet
policy
to
and procedures
do it.
are for this, because we haven't done it, I'm not a lawyer.
They have yet to do it, but they also have the only other place it could go then, according to 115, is to us
Well, that's what
in that instance. So we could receive it either from CPRB's final decision, or from the chief's final decision, or from the safety director's final decision, right? Because we are above all of that. We are the ultimate final, right?
Yeah.
But CPRB can, according to 115, overturn a chief's overturning of their decision now, but they've yet to do it. They're saying they don't have a manual or procedures, and they're beholden to the old way.
And the old way is that it would go to the safety director, who would appeal, and then within a very tight timeline here. So you guys have your meeting on Tuesday, we have to have the hearing, I'm not even sure it's written, but it's somewhere I've been assured, within 5 days. Well, 5 days from a Tuesday puts us before Monday, which means we have to have a hearing on Friday, which is very short notice for us to like turn around and get a charge letter out and get everybody over to the safety director's office. So we find out about it Tuesday afternoon, whenever the CPRB is done. And then we have to quickly scramble and say, okay, everybody be at the directors on Friday morning. Yes.
So kind of clarify what Jason just said. Like, I know we're the final. Oh, sorry. I know we're the final authority, but I guess my question is, do we go grab the case, or are they referring it? Right. So like, is it CPRB is like, okay, at this point, chief is doing this, safety director, we want to send it to commission, or is it we are like, we notice that there's conflict,
Right.
so then we initiate and just take the reins? How does that?
I unfortunately don't want to get involved. Like, so no, what it is I haven't. We haven't gone down that path. I haven't sat down and really read all of 115 and know all of. I kind of know what I do.
It's not that long if we pull it up.
I've done.
I just
So,
want to.
Let's read it so we're clear.
There you go.
Okay. So it's never been tested, right? So anything can be tested, right? But here's where it stands now. Civilian Police Review Board. Okay, so let's find the component where they have their own process, right? So they hear the OPS cases. I think we're all clear on that, right?
Yeah.
They decide the disposition. They recommend the level. It can either go to the chief or safety director, depending on the severity of what they recommend, right? Both the chief and the safety director have the ability to override their initial decision. So then what happens? Okay. Board's powers and duties. Let's find it here. Investigate and disposition of complaints. So the board will submit its fact and findings and recommendations to the chief. The chief and executive head of the police force must presume to be correct and defer to the board's fact and findings and recommendations absent affirmative proof. So the chief has to have a reason, or the executive head has to have affirmative proof to overturn, right? So that's the first test. Did they have affirmative reason to overturn? So it's a little different because I don't think that language existed before. It was more discretionary without standards. So now we have to have affirmative reason to overturn. So that's something worth noting, okay? And it has to be clear and convincing evidence that the findings and recommendations are clearly erroneous. So that's a pretty big standard, clear and convincing evidence. So the chief has to write back, or the safety director has to write back to CPRB and give clear and convincing evidence. What does that mean? It's subjective, right? But we don't know yet, because it's untested, how well they're doing that. So you writing the letters, it has not been tested yet if you are making clear and convincing. So, Absent affirmative proofs, clear and convincing evidence of the findings, within 10 days of receiving board's fact and findings and recommendations, the chief or executive head of the must impose at least a minimum discipline that the board has recommended. So if they can't do clear and convincing, they must impose the minimum. Now, if the chief or executive head of the police force believes that the clear and convincing evidence exists that would justify disregarding or modifying the board's fact and findings and disciplinary recommendations within 10 days, so they have to send a letter back within 10 days, the fact finding and recommendations that chief or executive head of the police force must notify the board in writing of any refusal or lesser alternative discipline to be imposed, detailing the reasons and providing the board with the clear and convincing evidence justifying the decision. So it's going back to the board and they're giving them information, right? So then they have to cite procedures, patterns, or practices and discipline predating this section's effective date cannot constitute clear and convincing evidence justifying any decision. All right, so now what happens? If the board then does not agree, so this is the new part, okay? This is what's changed. With the chief or executive head of the police force's refusal or alternative discipline, the board, notwithstanding any provisions of section 112 of this charter, on the contrary, may in its discretion overrule the chief or executive head of the police force and order either them to discipline the officer or employee up to including termination. The chief or the executive head of the police force must then comply. So they have their own ability to overturn the safety director and the chief now. They have yet, to my knowledge, exercised that ability. So where does that stand with us, right? In theory, if they're doing this right, we shouldn't hear a case from CPRB unless we disagreed with CPRB's decision, their final decision, right? Because we are the ultimate authority. So we can get cases from 2 points, and this is my perspective on it, right? If we don't agree with the whole CPRB discipline process and we don't think it comports with the matrix or the policy, and they made a decision, right? So let's say the chief overturned something, they turned it back, and even we disagreed with that, there is a chance we can hear that, right? But it has to go through the due process of all of this. Now, the other way we could maybe get it from CPRB, let's say the chiefs or the safety director said, we overturn CPRB. CPRB says that's fine, and they let it go. We don't agree with that, and we think CPRB should have overturned that, right? It is possible under 115 that we can then take that case and then decide for ourselves if we want to overturn that, right? Because we, again, it says we are the final. So the other way we could get it is if it doesn't see CPRB at all, right? It'll go to those same tracks. It'll either be a chief's hearing or a safety director's hearing, but CPRB will have nothing to do with it. So in that instance, when we look at that, we will be looking at the chief or the safety director's decision and then making a determination if it comports with the discipline policy based on their decision. So it's never been tested.
But who would send it? How do we get it?
Yeah. So so how would we get it? So we just covered this in our rules, right? Someone we can't watch all of these, right? There's no way we're going to be knowing every single case and everything that gets overturned, right? So if someone was unhappy with the outcome at CPRB, they would come and petition us to look at it. Or a commissioner could be watching the process, say this happened, and then they can go to their peers and be the petitioner themselves. So that's what our rules that we went over before. Yeah, the petitioner. So right. It's not automatic. So it is. There are no automatic appeals.
Okay, and there's nothing that says that if there is this disagreement, that it will come directly from the police review board to us. That does not exist.
No, it doesn't exist there. It does not. Someone would have to bring it to us, or a commissioner who was paying attention, right, would bring it to the board and say, we need to look at this, and then it would follow our rules, which is it would go to an analyzation, which we just passed that rule and rules committee. It'll be up for, we'll do an analysis of it. We'll look at the whole thing. Then it'll go before our accountability committee to consider if we're going to look at it or not.
So have Commissioner Wong.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, Chair.
Oh.
Oh, sorry. When you just mentioned petitioner, do you mean we have to go to court? When you say
No,
Petitioner is the person who brought the case.
Yeah.
yes, so but we don't have to get
A
to court.
petitioner is, by definition, is anyone coming to ask us for an action, right? So it could be internally or externally, our community member. Yeah.
Commissioner Wong and then Benito.
So, this might be a great time to remind everyone that we will send out those 2 rules. They're not going to encompass everything that we've spoken about today, but please read them and follow up with the Rules Committee with any feedback and concerns before our meeting on the 14th.
Commissioner Benito.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add something to that, which is that also, okay, yes, I wanted to add, and then I had a question about that. So the other thing is, it'll be easier for us to follow what's happening in CPRB, but it'll be, sounds like a little harder for the internal affairs process, except we do get those letters, the divisional notices. And so I'm guessing that staff would maybe flag if some of them, some might be flagged for us to review.
To the chair, so it's a lot. Again, it's hundreds of letters every year. So that will be for the accountability committee to establish what level of review, because we'll look at discipline as a whole for trends. We'll look at the process, right? But we're not going to read every case and just dig into it and double check. We'll do random audits. That's how it's typically done. That's how the monitor does it. So they will audit specific cases at random to see their quality, their integrity, and things like that. It's too much to audit every single case. It's outside of our ability.
And then my question about this was whether, when a case comes through CPRB, we know that by the time that they issue the formal notice to the division, right, by the time it gets to the point where they are overriding it, right, or there's conflict, we know that happens within 6 weeks, because there's a month that goes by, and then there's then it gets put to the public safety director. But for internal affairs cases, if we were to, you guys only have 6 months to make a discipline decision. So, or for depending on the level, either 6 months or a year. So can you tell us how, generally how long? Because what I'm imagining then is for us, it could be if they issue the discipline right at the 6 month buzzer, then we can't do anything based on the collective bargaining agreement.
Okay, yeah, I get where you're going. So the 6 month and 1 year thing, that is actually for the charge letter to go out. Okay, then once the charge letter goes out, by contract, we have 90, then there is another clock. There's 90 days for discipline to be imposed. Okay, so, right, and then, so yeah, I hear what you're saying there. I don't know what the workaround is on that. I can say that, from the chief's level, I'm involved in those. His are out within 30 days. But the director, his are more complex and involve much more serious levels of discipline, could involve termination. So he's going to be much more careful. And his are much closer to the 90-day point, where ours are, you might have some turnaround time actually on chief's ones. I don't know. But yeah, that's outside my ability, I guess.
Commissioner.
So this question is from a community member that had to leave early. I'm thinking the answer is yes, but I'll go ahead and ask you anyways and give me input. Can members of the community ask the police officers to turn on cameras during an interaction? Can members of the community request that police officers not be aggressive? Can they ask for the badge numbers and to please turn on your cameras?
Okay, so, all right, I'm going to answer those sort of one at a time. We generally cannot turn off our cameras if we're taking police action. We cannot turn off our cameras. Right, they're going to be on, and as long as we're taking police action, they're going to remain on. If we're in some sort of other interaction,
What if it's like one of those casual?
right. So that's not right. So there's some other sort of encounter, then the camera can be turned off. Okay, especially if we're inside their home. Okay, but if we're taking police action, the camera stays on. Okay, as even in hospitals and stuff like that, we, you know, the camera stays on, and that's our rule. So I'm sorry, there was like 4 questions there. The badge one, we actually give the name and badge whenever requested. That actually came up there.
Not be aggressive, to not be aggressive.
So we do have de-escalation policy. We do have the amount of force we use is all highly regulated. So if we were outside of policy, that will be an issue that can be addressed, and they can ask a supervisor or OPS to, you know, make a complaint, and then it would be reviewed. All uses of force are reviewed anyways, but so that's where the aggressiveness comes in. But if it's outside of policy, then there will be corrective action taken. I'm getting all sorts of hands up now. If it's within policy, though, it's within policy, and that was part of what that said. You know, we will investigate this to ensure that, and then, you know, that rules are being properly. If there's a breach of protocol, we'll see it. But if maybe the officer didn't do anything wrong, and then we can, you know, let the people know, no, this is actually within policy, and maybe this is why. Okay.
So we have Commissioner Adams.
My question will be quick. I just wanted to clarify. It was in terms of the wearable cameras. Is there a policy in place? Like, I just remember, and I just didn't know if it was because I was a commissioner now, so it felt weird to me. But I had to interaction with the police because there was something going on with one of my neighbors, and I had to call the police. And when they came, they announced that their cameras were on, and I had never experienced that before. So it just made me wonder: is there a policy that compels officers to let people know that the cameras are on? Like, is that an optional thing? Because I didn't understand. It never happened before, so I just wanted to know if that was a policy or if it was just something that they just did voluntarily.
No, it is written into our policy that you generally want to tell people that they're being recorded. Like the lieutenant talked about before, some people are very private about their homes. And in a very, very small circumstance, they can request that you turn the camera off. If there's a police function or something going on, I wouldn't advise doing that, just in case there's some type of use of force or something that happens in the home. But if you're just having maybe like a non-enforcement action or an investigative contact with somebody, they request you turn it off, then you can turn it off. But especially on traffic stops, part of our standard procedure is to say, just to let you know, I'm audio and video recording this interaction. Thank you.
So we got Commissioner Wong.
Yeah, I don't know if I misheard, but I don't think you 100% answered the first question. The person was asking, can they request that it be turned on? You've answered that it can be turned off in certain circumstances. Say a situation starts out as consensual, but maybe the citizen is concerned about how it is continuing. Can they request that the officers turn on their camera?
Yeah, they can request it, and any encounter that starts is no longer very amicable. Mm-hmm. The officer is required to turn on their camera immediately.
But I guess but it's from the citizen's request, right?
I don't know if that's specifically, if it's specifically stated.
Yeah, it doesn't specifically state that, but there would be no reason an officer would not want to turn their camera on. There's a portion of the wearable camera system policy, like the LT said, that as soon as it goes from a non-consensual encounter to something that could be investigatory, or there's a certain line that I'm missing where it says, hey, this is no longer just a conversation that we're having, the camera has to go on. But if a citizen, if I'm getting a cup of coffee and a citizen says, hey, can you please turn your camera on? There's no reason why I wouldn't. Yeah, I'll turn it on. No biggie.
We have Commissioner Garrett Ferguson.
Yes, I think what also that other question was getting to is, I guess, what power citizens have as a community member, as far as you guys are amazing officers, but if there's other officers who they don't want to, right? Where does that accountability lie? So we're assuming of the good faith nature of the officer who's sure, I don't mind turning it on, but in that event that a community member asks an officer, can you turn on your body camera? And the officer just doesn't want to. Where does the accountability lie?
Turning it on or turning it off?
Turn it on.
Turn it on?
Yeah, where does that accountability lie? So further down the road, can it say what officer says? Well, I don't have to do what the community member says, or is it no? You kind of do. So like,
Yes.
where's that? Line?
So clearly, if the person is saying, you know, I want you to turn your camera on, this conversation has gone from being an amicable one, a one that's just we're talking about the Cleveland Browns while I'm you know waiting in line somewhere or something like that, to something else. And our policy states that if it does become anything other than that, we do have to turn on our camera. So if they call and say, hey, there's an issue, and we go look and we can't find any video, then by default, the officer has violated policy.
So we have.
Commissioner Benito.
I see that. I wanted to, I have two quick questions. One is, you know, what we like to ask this of our guests. What would you like to see the commission accomplish, and you know, what are you hoping comes out of what we're doing? And two, you know, as someone who primarily deals with discipline, that would be a hard position to be in the division. How do you maintain positive relationships with everybody while also really being involved in discipline?
The same answer for both. Fairness. That's all I would request from anyone else, and that's how I act. I just do what's fair and what's right, and you know, if they did something wrong, they did something wrong. I don't want bad cops on nobody. No police officer wears a uniform wants a dirty cop on the street. We don't want that. But anything that's done, we just want fair. That's all.
So we have Mr. Jackson from the community.
Hi, thanks, Lieutenant. A couple quick questions. One, on the Group 3 violations, you cite gross immorality. Can you define what is gross immorality? Give us some examples. And part two of that is you were very clear about the responsibility of other officers to report information that they know. If that would be a Group 3 and someone knew about it, they too would then be responsible for that same Group 3 violation, right? If they failed to report it.
Yes.
Okay, so can you give us some examples of what you find to be a Group 3, a gross immorality?
I think I just saw something where in West Virginia, at their academy, that all police officers go through, somebody put cameras in the women, surreptitiously put cameras in the women's locker room. That would be gross immorality. You know, that would be an example of it. I'm sure there's many others, but that's just one that was just in the news recently.
Real quick, may I ask you this? Where would you put if an officer had probably improper relations with a subordinate? Is that considered gross immorality?
So a couple things. One, that we'd have to look at the definition of what a Group 1, Group 2, and Group 3 definition are. I think I think we're in a lot of gray areas. What is the what inappropriate is consensual? Is it not? I mean, what is if it's not consensual? It clearly is in there. Fraternization. I think there's still a lot of. It's not my position to make that decision. I'm gonna say because the chief is the ultimate decider. The chief is the ultimate decider, you know, of those sort of things. And when we get into gray areas, we have discussions. And I think I go to them. Is this something? You know, where does this? I'm not sure. You know, it's sort of straddling between a Group 2 and a Group 1, or a Group 2 and a Group 3. Which way do you want to go with this? So I'm sorry to sort of punt on that, but.
Okay, let's go back to the question, maybe a little bit easier to answer.
Yeah.
Now, we do know some officers do not like to have a camera on, but now I'm talking about an issue or situation not under anybody's control. The body cam right now is out of power. So of course it cannot be on.
Mm-hmm.
But right now, the officers are talking to, for example, let's just say it's me. If I still want to have the camera, that means somebody probably has to go to fetch another body cam for the officer to have on in order to actually have it on. So during this time, does that mean all the conversation could be stopped or should be stopped because I want the camera to be on, but no camera has power.
Right.
So should we have the conversation, wait till the good camera with the battery power fully charged to come back on, then we continue the conversation?
So, the cameras, I mean, we could have another person come out with a camera that's, working, that has battery power. If police action has to be taken, police action has to be taken. We can't, you know, if somebody still has to be arrested, if somebody still has to be taken into custody, we can't not do it because we don't have cameras. I mean, we did it for, you know.
Right now, we are having conversation, no arrest yet.
Right, well, you said, you know, is everything gonna stop? Well, it depends on what the situation is.
The conversation.
If it's just a conversation, then yeah, if they wanna have somebody else come on, we could have another officer respond or supervisor respond. It doesn't happen that often, but it does happen sometimes where the cameras do power off because we have officers having to work double shifts. And the cameras can handle that unless they're on something where they're stuck on something where the camera's like consistently running for maybe, you know, 2 straight hours. They're at a homicide and they can't turn it off because they're at the scene. So it's really sucking up the battery because it's not just being used intermittently for that 2 hours.
And also right now for the hot summer, we cannot say body cam will behave not like any other electronics get overheated problem. This is the reason why, just for the sake of information, I would like to know when the residents or the citizens, whatever you want to call it, having a conversation in the middle, the body cam run out of power or overheating issue. Can we pause the conversation and wait for somebody with a fully charged, good body cam, then to resume the conversation?
I think the only issue we'd ever have, maybe, the body cameras are very expensive. They're not affected, I don't think, really by water or heat or any of that stuff. The only issue would be the one with the battery running down. Once again, if it's just a conversation or no police action has to be taken at that time, it would probably be prudent to have somebody with a camera respond if we have somebody available. You know, it depends how busy a shift is and things like that. But if police, I'm going to still go back to if police action has to be taken, we have to take police action. Yeah, I don't.
And you forgot the rights. Right now, I already made that clear. No arrest will happen yet.
No, I'm not going to. No, if an arrest has to happen, arrest has to happen.
No arrest happening yet. Right now, maybe the police officer only talk to me to get information.
Oh,
maybe
yeah.
it's not something directly on me. That means somebody else could be arrested,
Oh, yeah.
not even me. So if I still want the camera to be on to record the whole thing, and I'm willing to wait, even though your procedure actually is not to waste the time to wait for too long, because it could be in the busy intersection, we don't know.
Right.
That's why I want to know, how do we handle the balance between civilians' right and your policy, your procedure?
Right.
Thank you.
So we're not going to violate anybody's constitutional rights. You know, that's very clear. The constitutional rights supersede any procedures and policies we have. Our policies are actually written so we're in conformity to the constitutional rights. So whatever we're going to do, it's going to be, we're not going to violate your rights. And then we go, you know.
A quick question with that. Are there not chargers that can be used in a car for these wearable cameras? There must be. I mean, it's the same technology as this.
Yeah. I guess they can be charged. I don't know if you have to take it off your, you know, they're hooked to your body and they're to remain on your outermost garment. So then maybe to tether yourself might become an issue. I don't know if that's actually a pretty good, you know, thing. You even having a battery pack that's mobile.
Or something that you can attach to. Like
Right. So that's something that maybe we can, for the technology unit too.
Yeah.
Right. What was that? I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, something to explore. Certainly, yes. Right. That's what I mean. Yeah, something that's not. Yeah, I wouldn't want to be necessarily tethered to the car, but a battery pack or something like that kind of does make some sense.
Madam Chair.
So I do have a question. So is this, are we having 2 sessions of this, or is it just general one?
It was sort of just one. It just covered this one. It was broken up into 2 hours, but it's just.
Okay.
If somebody wants to take a break or something, I'm okay.
I was trying to see if we have another. Okay.
No. This is it.
Or like, you got it? Okay.
This is it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Lieutenant, one quick question. You spoke about the retaliation process for citizens to how they can report that process. But you didn't speak about what the procedure is for officers to report internal retaliation. Is there a system for that, and can you expound on it?
Yeah, if there's an allegation, I guess we go to internal affairs. Everything goes to internal affairs. So all of our stuff filters to them, and then they would either investigate it. And that's something I think that they would be investigating, and they would take care of that. I mean, it's always up to them to decide whether they're going to investigate something or kick it back to the district supervisors to investigate. Without speaking to the internal affairs superintendent who makes that decision, I don't know, but I tend to think that would be the type of thing that internal affairs would be investigating.
Do we have any further questions from the commission?
I do. Kind of a follow from this earlier question. Does CPD not have a fraternizing policy already? And you guys handle it?
We do have, I believe it's in our manual rules. There is some between supervisors and subordinates. However, we are a work environment. People, I mean, there was in the 4th district, I had a zone car where it was a husband and wife worked a car together.
And that's allowed.
That was allowed.
And then I guess kind of with that morality clause for the group 3, would an example of that be, because there has been many cases of CPD law enforcement having inappropriate relationships with women in the community during whether it's a stop or whether it's
So we actually recently had an officer terminated. By recently, it might be over a year now, but an officer was terminated for engaging after he'd go on assignments. Then he would contact the victims. It came to the division attention, and that officer was terminated.
What is the policy that was violated there? As I'm looking,
Probably it could be the gross immorality. I believe that was. Okay. I think that might have been exactly what was referenced.
Is there any type of sexual misconduct policies in your manual that's not on here, that's explicit, so that an officer would know not to put this over there?
I mean, right in here, I think it does say that sex on duty is a group 3 violation. I think there's something. Well, yeah, that one wasn't on duty. Right. And it still came to our attention.
No, I'm very glad that happened. I'm just thinking I'm thinking ahead of just some officers would say well, no, there's never been a policy. I'm wondering is there any?
We have a sexual harassment.
Okay.
Oh, sexual harassment. I know you're going there. Okay, I'm sorry.
And that follows for the community and.
I have to look at it, but I think the sexual harassment policy is internal.
It's internal.
I would have to double check before I give you a.
So there's nothing or any trainings around police and how they deal with women in the community as far as is there any type of policy or any type of training that's don't contact sex workers after the case is over, after this to try to get services. Is there any type of guidelines or guidance that you all have up front to prevent those types of behaviors?
It's so outside of what I would consider.
I can't think of anything that was specifically.
Yeah, I can think of specific, but it would fall under conduct unbecoming and that sort of thing. So if we became aware of it.
I have it.
So we
it
have
doesn't answer.
Kennedy, and then we have Adams, and then.
So sort of a follow-up. Thank you, Commissioner Ferguson. Our officers put through sexual assault training, and if so, what does that look like?
He's more of a training than I.
When you say sexual assault training, are you referring to a sex offense?
I'm referring to, so I see that you have a sexual harassment policy, but considering it sounds like officers are responding to a lot of domestic violence calls, we also know that there's been a lot of pain and frustration around the delay in the processing of rape kits in our community. So just understanding what a sexual assault is, how it functions, just having a better understanding of how to communicate with victims, trauma-informed care, all of those types of things. And this could be relevant both to working with the community, but also in the department as well.
So we do have a lengthy policy on sexual assault offenses, which covers a lot of those topics. And we do have a sexual assault course that all officers go through. The title escapes me, but I'll go on my phone and look it back up, that all officers have to go through to be certified. Okay?
What is that? Can you tell me anything about the sexual assault training?
The training in the academy?
Yeah.
So you have to be a certified instructor to teach that, and I am not a certified instructor in that topic. So when you are a police academy instructor, each little branch has its own set of training and skills that you develop, so you can come back and teach the recruits. In that specific topic, I'm not a certified instructor on.
Okay, could we get, are there training materials, documentation, anything like that? Okay, we would, yeah, I know myself and some other commissioners would really appreciate that. It's high on our priority list. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have Commissioner Adams and then we have Commissioner Wong.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up, kind of along the lines of the questioning. So you have your GPOs. So are your GPOs, are they something that has to be, are they finalized by a certain date and then they're good for a period of time, or are you constantly revising them? So say, for example, because we're having a discussion and it sounds like some of these things might need to be in the GPO, or some of these things might need to be added. Do you have the ability to kind of go in and make adjustments to the GPOs, or does that have to happen under like a certain time frame?
Right. So I'm going to answer this just somebody who once wrote general police orders. It means that's not what I do right now, and then somebody's just been on the job for 30 years and knowing sort of the process. So general police orders are written. They have no expiration date on them. They are eventually usually revised as they become outdated. In the writing of general police order, a lot of work is done. We usually contact other agencies, see what their policies are on something like that. Try to call a couple different agencies, get their ideas of how to do something, incorporate it with Cleveland, and sort of take the best ideas from a bunch, and then create a general police order. We have it's done by we have a policy section that is responsible for writing the general police orders. So they'd be the ones who would actually research and write the order. Now, general police orders are procedural, so they're not. The general police orders are how to do something. We also have the manual of rules, which is not procedural, and these are things they're more vague, but you will obey these things. They don't tell you how to do the things. They tell you, you will respond. You'll fully investigate cases or things like that.
Just a quick follow. I'm just asking because these violations are in a GPO, right?
Some of those might be in the manual. Those might be part of manual rules.
I guess what I was trying to get at is, for example, these concerns that are being brought up that are valid. So, say for example, if our policy committee or our accountability committee wanted to, link up with the CDP's people who are involved with this, it would be possible to sort of add some of these things to what's already here on paper.
So once again with the policy section, they're the ones you would contact. Just remember, again, general police orders are procedures. There's a policy at the beginning which says this is where we want the procedures to take us, and then there's procedures. The other things that I think some of these things are more manual rules. Some of these things might be procedural. So the manual rule says you won't be asleep on duty. There's no procedures to that. There's no, but you're not allowed to do it. So it's in the manual rules.
But the most important thing is that they can be revised as seen fit.
Right. Okay. We try not to, now GPOs can, and it's way easier to revise a GPO now than when I was on the job because everything was on paper back then. So if we want to revise a GPO that was 10 pages long, that means we're reprinting out a 10-page GPO and disseminating it to 1,800 people. Nowadays, it's all electronic, so it's not easy. But we don't generally change. Manual rules are a little bit more permanent in nature, but GPOs change more frequently.
Okay, so I just, this doesn't answer Ms. Garrett Ferguson's question, I think, but it does answer Mr. Jackson's question. This is the GPO for the sexual harassment policy, which is cited in Group 3.
Okay.
1.10.07. I'll just read it in part. In its employment, the division shall not tolerate sexual harassment in a form that requires sexual cooperation as a condition of employment, promotion, layoff, training, or as a term or condition for transfer, details, or the assignment of job duties. Supervisory personnel shall not use implicit or explicit sexual behavior to control, influence, or affect the career, salary, or job of an officer or an employee. Management shall ensure that the work environment is free from sexual harassment. Officers and members shall feel free to raise their concerns without fear of retaliation, and all members shall be afforded a work environment free from unsolicited verbal comments, gestures, or physical contact of a sexual nature.
So you can sleep with your subordinate?
No, so you can't, because it's affecting,
No,
unless,
you can.
unless there's a promotion involved, is that what you're saying?
You can sleep with your subordinate.
Well, is that a condition of probation, as long as it's not a condition of probation?
I think we should be mindful because we are not lawyers and we need to be mindful of what we say. Everything is recorded. And we don't know the conditions of that case. No, I'm specific. I think we should follow along with what was said, particularly to the community comment. No, I'm talking about as a response to a community comment.
Allowed to speak.
I understand what you say. Chair Bridgeway.
Okay, so, comment and then a question. So, a comment is just regarding what was read. And so I can see how it could be interpreted as you see it, but like you say, we're not the ones who wrote it or have the full explanation. The follow-up I want to have is with Commissioner Adams. I think when we first started doing, being considered for this commission, I thought I could learn 248 GPOs. I think that's what it was back then. And I saw that 4 or 5 of them had been deleted. They were actually crossed out. You know, so we have seen some that have been deleted, maybe because of them being updated or out of date or whatever. But I did see that. So I wanted to say that I have seen on that list of 248 GPOs or whatever, there were at least 4 or 5 where they had literally been deleted from the list.
That's absolutely, and that's, as a matter of fact, that's why I said, like in the specifications, I said, putting the date of the general police order, because they do change, and we want to make sure we're looking at the correct order for what occurred at the order that was in effect at the time. So if the general police orders do change, and how frequent, it's easier to change them now than it used to, because they're right.
Thank you.
We have Commissioner Benito.
Thank you. I think I just wanted to also kind of add in on the conversation about sexual assault and sexual harassment. As a social worker who has worked in domestic violence and sexual assault for more than 13 years at this point, I agree with the concern about the issue, and I certainly hope this is something that we can look at on the accountability committee and also the policy committee. From some of what I have read and seen with cases in other cities and other divisions when this has happened, and I think I hear you that a lot of the GPOs are about procedure and that there might be things in there. What can you actually repeat what you called the?
We have a manual of rules, and I think there's something in the manual of rules regarding supervisors and subordinate activity. I'm sure it's in one of the rules.
Yeah, we'll definitely review. Look, I'll definitely take a look at that. But I think one thing that I have seen, and we have something similar here, is that what I've seen in other departments when there's something like that where this happens, fairly frequently, where you might have an officer. Well, I won't say fairly frequently, but it has happened where officers will then contact victims or people that they were interacting with after an interaction when they're off duty. And one of the things that is in the standards of conduct and courtesy, which is 1.1.03, one of the procedures is not to engage in any conduct, speech, or acts while on or off duty, which would reasonably tend to diminish the esteem of the division of police in the eyes of the public. And so that is one area that I've seen this be shown to be like this is a breaking of that rule because that behavior diminishes the.
Right, it's also Rule 5.01 I'm sorry, it's also, we use it under, I generally use it under Rule 5.01, which is in the manual of rules, which is, something that would diminish the esteem of the division. And then he did find, I was mentioning there was a rule about subordinate.
So in the same chapter, 5.14, I'm not gonna read the whole thing, but superior officers shall not fraternize with subordinates in their chain of command in a manner that corrupts the integrity of the superior subordinate command structure. I'll take a look.
So we have that in the manual, so how does this, where does this fall on the violations then? Is it a terminable offense?
Well, if it would fit under the sexual harassment, it was gonna fall under where the sexual harassment is. It would be determining what if it would have to be looked on a case-by-case basis. How did this destroy the structure of the subordinate supervisory situation? And then would fall wherever it falls based on the definition of all the group violations.
This is not a fully inclusive list by any means.
Right. No, this is, so we have the definitions of a group 1, group 2, and group 3 definition that are in our in the general police order. And this is sort of help give examples of things that fall under in each of those. And like I said, there's even like AWOL is in all 3 of them because there's different levels of AWOL. It's a strong guide. It's also like lets us know what is similar misconduct, like what sort of fits with those sort of things to give us, because the definition is sort of legalese and that helps us objectify it, I guess.
I guess my concern, especially like with what Commissioner Wayne read and like some of the policies that you guys are citing, even for internal but nothing external, is that it seems that the only standard is that officers cannot engage in sexual activities while on duty. However, I think it's safe to say that there is a sort of culture that it seems amongst, there's been multiple like news reports and everything of how officers have been in compromising situations with women in the community. And I guess I'm not understanding how come there's nothing to even protect them that's more explicit. Because I think when we say stuff like diminished integrity, what you think is a diminishing integrity of the officer might be different in my interpretation. Because I'm thinking of like instances of like, so an officer is allowed to flirt with women and when they're on duty. Because there's nothing, it doesn't seem like there's any, the only standard it looks like is just they can't have sex. But it's okay if they are flirting, if they are actively pursuing someone while they're on duty. Like, where is any language that actually is in writing that protects beforehand?
Well, once again, we're mentioning the esteem, and if a woman wants to file a complaint that an officer is bothering them, I'm sure we'd find a rule. We'd go through our rules and find something that would cover that.
But anything explicit. So I'm not saying like the esteem or anything, but
the manual of rules is like I even mentioned they're open-ended to cover. They're not procedural. They're open to cover a lot of different things, like the appearance of impropriety. There's something for that. So what is an appearance of impropriety? Well, we know it when we see it.
So if a woman says that an officer, they felt that an officer asked them because an officer asked them for their phone number while they were on duty, like they might be patrolling the local McDonald's, and they put in a complaint of that. If there's nothing, I guess, in writing that's like explicit, would that even be taken serious when a woman would say, like, for her safety, she did not feel safe because when she goes to McDonald's, the police officer on duty asked her for her phone number. Like, would that be something in that esteem? Because there's nothing explicit.
Well, clearly, if she's making this complaint, she's bothered by it. If she's bothered by it, then the presumption is the officer acted inappropriately.
Okay.
We'd also have to be careful to make sure that she's just not saying this because her brother was arrested by this officer, and now she's saying, he's talking to me inappropriately, somewhere, something like that. So it would have to be looked at, carefully, and then go from there. But clearly, unless there's something to show that she has some ulterior motive for why she's making this complaint, and clearly she was bothered by it, and that would be I'm sure, a violation.
I would just say it's interesting that when we bring up scenarios around sex and women, the first thing you say that they could have an ulterior motive. I think that's also.
I don't believe that was the first thing I said, but.
The instances it goes very quickly, but also like because that was very sexist and offensive as a woman that's asking that question. But also, I would think that to protect officers from a person with ulterior motives, it could be a written policy so that everybody's on the same page. They know what they can and cannot do.
Do we have Commissioner Wong?
I want to ask Lieutenant Ryan, to that end, is gender included in the bias-free policing? Gender and history of women, and also kind of concatenated and intersecting with race, how certain populations of women have been sexualized more than others and certain stereotypes depending on their community.
I don't believe that would be included in our, repeat your very first part of your
Is
question.
gender part of the discussion in the bias-free policing?
Yes.
In what form?
So it would not be to the level of what you spoke of at the end of your question. When we talked about high level topics such as the history behind the gender, some type of gender bias. So it would not be to that level, but it is discussed the same as a bias against any race, age, religion, that type of thing.
So, but is it just like you have these stereotypes of women, or is it spoken about how there is a disbalance of power?
It is not spoken to that high level.
At that's a high level to talk about gender in terms of power?
Well, whatever level it is, we have not spoke about it to that level.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Reeves?
I just want to quickly use the word citizen, because men are harassed too. Men get flirted with. Men have been assaulted.
As a community member, I've witnessed all kinds of situations. People think that police has overpowered the residents, but guess what? I've seen female officers being disrespected by male community members. She was doing her job, but she could still get the same treatment, just like what people would think a male officer could do to a female resident in the city. This is the reason why I will agree with Commissioner here's idea. That's what I have too. If we can make a policy procedures up front, then both sides are protected when they are not at fault. Anybody is actually doing things on purpose or just trying to get their ways will get what they deserve instead of getting the innocent people, doesn't matter civilians or officers, to be blamed. This is important. We have to be fair, helping both sides. That's how we can establish the harmony in the community to decrease the distrust between residents and police. Thank you.
Do we have any further comment? Questions?
I just wanted to say, I think this is definitely a lot to think about, but this may be like, I would suggest maybe should form a work group to kind of maybe look at this a little further. I'll say like through the accountability committee. I mean, they can work together, but we just it's probably a combo of policy and accountability, and then maybe training at a certain point. But we should just maybe get a combo of people who are in those areas for a work group, because I do think we probably got a lot to look at here.
And I just want to add one comment to what you said, Commissioner Adams, and this is for the benefit of our listeners as well, that for a work group is not limited to the people who sit around this table. It also involves community members as well. So if there are those out there that are interested in some of the topics that we have identified today, please contact the office here and let them know. And as we move forward developing those work groups, we can make sure that they're included.
So. Huh? So it seems like we have no further comments. You have a comment?
No.
Okay, so feel free to close out this session. If you would like to say any last, summaries or parting words.
I just hope that, maybe it's gonna engage you guys in more, conversation about this. And I hope I was able to maybe clear some things and let you have a better understanding of how our procedures work, I guess. Yeah, more questions than answers.
Thank you so much for
All right.
taking the time to allow us to be informed on these various topics. It was very informative, and I believe that this will allow us to move forward in like our work groups and moving this work forward. Thank you to the staff for organizing. Thank you for the community, and most importantly, all commissioners that are in attendance for your time and dedication on this sunny Saturday. I think.
No, I was gonna say, Lieutenant Ryan is the last one on this agenda. Smith.
Oh, I wanted to drop the mic.
Well, I have nothing, other than, just to, close out. If there's anything outstanding, I'm sure we're all excited to enjoy our nice day. If you have any questions or concerns, you can bring them up now. You can email me, kryan is my email. Do you all have city emails?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so kryan is my city email. So if there's ever anything I can help you with, let me know, and that's all I have.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jason, do you have anything you want to say? Okay, so the meeting is adjourned at 3:35 p.m. What's the training?
Thank you.
Thanks, Sharon. Good job, Sharon.
Thank you very much, I appreciate it.